360 Srimadbhagavad Chapter 3 Material objects such as body etc. cannot be proved to be one's own. They have been bestowed upon him, so that he may make its right use. But, when he lays a claim on them, he is bound. Therefore, when a striver through discrimination accepts the objects and actions as the Lord's, it means that he surrenders these to him. In the verse, the expression adyatmasitaza has been used specially. It means that it is out of ignorance that the perishable body or world seems to be one's own. If discrimination is applied, the perishable body or world cannot seem as one's own, only the Lord will appear as his own. Attachment to the world leads to degradation, while detachment leads to progress, i.e., upliftment. The two-lettered mama, i.e., this is mine, is death, and the three-lettered na mama, i.e., this is not mine, is immortality, maha. Santi. 1314. Asvamdaka 5129. An important fact pertaining to surrender: the Lord urges a man to surrender all actions to him because he considers the body, senses, mind, intellect, life breath, material and actions, his own and for himself. But in fact, these are neither his nor can be his. How can the perishable have affinity for the imperishable? Therefore, surrender all actions either to the world or to nature or to God. The result will be the same, as the world is an evolute of nature and God is the Lord of nature. Thus, both the world and nature belong to God. Therefore, a striver should think that he is God's and his so-called possessions are also God's, i.e., he should renounce his feeling of mindness to these. In that case, he has to expect nothing, either from the world or from God. The Lord himself looks after his wants, needs. When a striver surrenders his body etc. to him, these do not seem to him to be his own. If these appear to him to be his own, it means that he has not surrendered them to him. Verse 30. Therefore, the Lord exhorts a striver to surrender these to him, with a discriminative insight. Thus, when a striver surrenders these to God, he comes to know the truth, that in fact these are the Lord's, not his. The fact of surrender to God is so unique, that even if we surrender out of feeling of surfeit, it brings us immense benefit. In fact, actions, objects, the body and the self, are not one's own. Actions can be surrendered even after their accomplishment. But real surrender is achieved only when we renounce our affinity with objects and actions. This abandonment is possible when we discern that instruments, body etc., objects, actions and the embodied self are only God's. A striver commits an error, that he tries to surrender actions and objects to God, but he does not surrender his body etc., and the self to him. Thus his surrender remains incomplete. Therefore, a striver should think that all the objects including his body, senses, mind, intellect and the self, belong to God, which are really his. A mere outward renunciation of actions and objects is not real surrender. Real surrender consists in regarding the objects and possessions as his. If a striver surrenders these to God by regarding these as his own, the Lord reciprocates by returning these manifold, in the same way as seed sown come into a rich harvest. But, still it is in a limited amount. However, when he surrenders these to him regarding them as his, he offers himself to him, and also feels indebted to him. The Lord is very much pleased with such a surrender, even when it does not help the Lord in any way. But its doing so, striver is released from the bondage of actions. When a child hands over the key lying in a courtyard to the father, the latter is very much pleased with the baby and wishes it a long life. Why? The reason is that the child has good feelings when it offers the key to the father, ever though it belongs to him. Similarly, God is pleased with the striver who offers all objects, the body and the self to him, and is indebted to him. An important fact pertaining to desire: the Lord has created the human body in a most unusual way, and the Lord by his grace has abundantly bestowed upon a human being the materials for his existence in spiritual practice, including discrimination. When man, disregarding his discrimination, uses the things for his selfish motive, and has a desire to acquire more things, he is enslaved and he has to follow the cycle of birth and death. Every man knows the reality, that family, circumstances, ability, power, body, senses, mind and intellect etc., have been acquired. These were neither his in the past, nor would remain his in the future, because they never remain the same. and are ever changing. If, having realized this fact, man ceases to depend on these, without attaching importance to them, he can attain salvation, without any doubt. Attachment to these is the root cause of bondage. His attachment to these gives birth to several other desires, which lead him to sin, pain, sorrow and hell, etc. All these things are perishable while the self is imperishable. So he should perform his duty by renouncing desires. Here, a doubt may arise: how would he be inclined to act without desire? The clarification is, that a man is inclined to act for the satisfaction of desires, as well as to get rid of these. Common men perform actions in order to satisfy their desires, while strivers act for the purification of their souls, in order to get rid of desires. Gita 5:11. In fact, actions are performed in order to get rid of desires rather than to satisfy them. The aim of human life is to attain God. When this aim is achieved, nothing more remains to be acquired. Only those people who have forgotten the real aim of human life, i.e., God realization, remain inclined to act in order to satisfy their desires. The Lord has called such people wretched or pitiful, as they seek the fruits of their actions. Gita 2:49. On the other hand, those strivers who perform actions by renouncing their fruits, in order to be free from desires, have been called wise. Gita 2:51. The feelings of rendering selfless service, self-realization and God-realization, are aims, rather than desires, while the feeling to acquire perishable objects is desire. Therefore, it is wrong to think that a man is not inclined to act without desire. Actions are performed scrupulously, in order to attain one's aim. Man, soul, is a fragment of God, but his disinclination for God and inclination towards the world gives birth to necessity, as well as desires. When he totally renounces his assumed affinity for the world, his necessity is fulfilled, and he gets rid of desires. When all actions and objects are surrendered to God, even then a fragment of desire, as the sense of mine and grief, can remain. For example, if we offer a book to someone, and we see him studying that book, we think that he is studying the book given by us. In order to free us from this minor attachment, the Lord urges us not to have a desire to acquire anything, nor to be attached to the acquired things, and not to be grieved for the things lost. The criterion for surrender is that a striver has no fragment of desire, no feeling of mine, and no grief. When a striver surrenders all actions and objects to God, sometimes because of past impressions, influences, he feels that he has not got rid of desire, the sense of mineness and grief. Such a striver need not lose heart, because only he who perceives desire, the sense of mineness and grief, becomes free of them. Similar is the case with egoism. Every human being fully deserves to get rid of desire, and a sense of mine and grief. In the whole Gita, the Tenasijvara, mental fever, viz., grief, has only been used here. In a war, a warrior is grieved at the death of his kith and kin. Therefore, Lord Krishna directs Arjuna to fight, delivered from grief, as his duty as a member of the warrior class. The Lord means to say that a striver should perform his duty by surrendering it to God, and being free from desire, a sense of mineness and grief, remaining equanimous in success and failure, pleasure and pain, a sense of mineness and aversion, etc., is known as a state of Vigratajvara, freedom from grief. In fact, all the mental defects, such as a sense of mineness, aversion, worry, agitation and turmoil, etc., are included in jvara, an important fact when a striver has God realization as the only goal of his life. All his possessions and things, whether superior or inferior, are surrendered to God. Having surrendered his actions and objects, he surrenders his desire, the sense of mineness and grief, which appear in him, to God. Thus, he becomes a staunch devotee with exclusive devotion. For a sage who wishes to attain yoga, action is said to be the means. Gita 6:3, because, while performing action, he comes to know his defects, desire, the sense of mineness, etc. Therefore, in the 12th verse of the 12th chapter, the renunciation of the fruit of action has been considered to be better than meditation. The reason is that in meditation a striver pays attention so that the mind is not volatile. When his mind is fixed, he regards it as his success and does not pay heed to other defects, such as desire and sense of mindness, etc. Therefore, the Lord in this verse orders Arjuna to perform his duty of fighting, so that he may come to know his defects also. As the Lord, in the 48th verse of the 2nd chapter, instructs Arjuna to perform his duty while being equanimous in success and failure, here, he asks him to fight being free. A volunteer offers his service being a member of a voluntary committee. But when is honored or praised, he relishes it, i.e., derives pleasure out of it. This is wrong. Thus such defects become known only when actions are performed from desire, the sense of mindness and grief. When even such a savage deed as fighting can be performed with equanimity, what other action is there which cannot be performed with equanimity? Equanimity can be attained by believing, I am neither my body, nor the body is mine, nor is it for me, which is also a fact. It is possible to do an act worth doing only when a striver's aim is focused on God, and not on the world. As the striver advances gradually on the path of God realization, his vices, like desire, minus and attachment, etc., diminish automatically, and he experiences his self to be positioned in equanimity. As soon as the practice of equanimity gets perfect, the doership is vanished completely and identification with the aim is established. As a rule, the ego perishes when there remains no desire to do anything for one's own good gain. Arjuna wants to attain salvation without performing his duty of fighting. When Arjuna asks for a way to salvation, the Lord orders him to fight, as it is his duty. According to the Lord, salvation can be attained through the path of action or knowledge or devotion. Appendix. By now the Lord answered Arjuna's question, why do you urge me to perform such a dreadful deed? In several ways. Now in this verse the Lord tells him the method to perform actions through the path of devotion to God. Surrender all actions to me. By this expression the Lord means to say, without regarding actions and objects as yours and for you, regard them as mine and for me. The reason is that God is entire, complete, and all actions and objects, adibita, matter, are within the entire form of the Lord. Gita 7:29-30. Here the term maya, me, has been used for the entire form of the Lord. In this verse by the expression, maya sarvani karmani sanyasya bhaktiyoga, the path of devotion, by the expression, adhyatmasi tasajnanaga, the path of knowledge, and by the expression, nayarasilmramamobiyat vyudyasva vigatajvara karmaga, the path of action, have been mentioned. Link. Having outlined his teaching, principle, in the preceding verse, in the next two verses, the Lord substantiates the same. Persons who always follow this teaching of mine, with faith and without question, are released from the bondage of all actions, karma. 31. Comment. A person belonging to any caste, creed, sect and order of life, etc., who wants to be released from the bondage of actions, should practice this teaching by realizing the fact that the body, senses, mind, intellect, objects and actions, etc., are not one's own. Men are released from this bondage. Sradhavanta is he who has a firm faith in and devotion for the Lord and his teaching. A man is released from bondage when he regards the material objects, such as body, etc., neither as his nor for him. Having faith in this truth, it becomes easy to renounce the assumed affinity for the insentient. A striver having faith only listens to the divine discourses and translates these into practice. This human body has been bestowed upon us, so that we may realize God. So we should try to arouse a yearning to realize Him. When this yearning is aroused, other virtues such as faith, promptness and self-control, etc., are naturally inculcated in our mind. The Lord has laid emphasis on faith and also freedom from petty objections, because even a man of faith can have a carping nature, to some extent. So the Lord urges strivers to be totally free from cavil. The Lord also lays emphasis on this very fact, while glorifying the study of the Gita when he declares, a man who hears this gospel with faith and uncritically is liberated. Gita 18:71. When a man holds that the teaching of the Lord is good, but it reveals his boastful and egoistic nature, or how could actions lead to salvation, when these are conducive to bondage, such opinions show a man's critical spirit. So, a striver should be free from this sort of attitude. In fact, all objects belong to the Lord, but by an error, a man regards these as his own, and so he is enslaved. It is because of his attachment and desire that he has to suffer. Therefore, the Lord, out of his grace and affection, urges him to surrender all actions and things to him, so that he may attain eternal bliss, though he lacks nothing, and is perfect. The Lord's teaching is called an universal doctrine. Here the Lord's teaching or discipline has been described by the term madam. The Lord, out of his natural simplicity and absence of vanity, has called the universal principle as mere mata. His teachings ever remain the same, without undergoing any modifications. It depends upon a man whether he has faith in it or not. Here, the adjective nityam, constant, does not qualify madam, teaching, but it modifies anudisthanti, practice, follow, because the Lord is eternal, constant, and so all objects pertaining to him are also eternal. His teaching is also eternal, so the Lord emphasizes that it should be practiced constantly. Question: what is the doctrine of the Lord, and how should it be practiced, followed? Answer: all acquired things are not ours. This is the considered view of the Lord. Whatever materials, body, senses, mind, intellect, life, breath, riches, property, objects, etc., there are, these are the evolutes of nature, and the world is also an evolute of nature. So, all of these have identity with the world, while the self, being a fragment of God, has its identification with him. Therefore, all of these are not our personal possessions, but have been bestowed upon us, so that we may utilize them properly. Besides these, the virtues such as good conduct, renunciation, dispassion, kindness and forgiveness, etc., are also not personal, being divine traits. They also belong to God. Had these been ours, these would have also remained with us, and no one could have acquired them without our permission. But it is not so. When we accept these as ours, we are proud of these, and pride is a root of demoniac endowment. When we regard a thing, which really is not ours, as ours, it captures us. Materialistic things, such as body, etc., are neither ours nor for us. Had they been ours, they might have provided us full satisfaction when we acquired them. But these never satisfy us, and add fuel to desires. But if we realize God, we are fully satisfied, and we attain perfection, and nothing further remains to be gained, acquired. As a lost child is not pleased and satisfied with any other woman, though she is also a mother, except his own mother, similarly, we are not satisfied with any other state except God realization. Therefore, so long as we have the desire to acquire something, it means that we have not acquired our very own object, viz., God. We neither brought the worldly things with us, nor can we carry these with us, and at present also, these are deserting us constantly. While presently these are under our possession, it behaves that we use these for the welfare of the world, rather than lay claim to them. The Lord is so generous and gracious, that he bestows these upon us in such a way, that they appear to us to be ours. If we use them for our selfish motive, it means that we misuse his generosity and grace. Therefore, a striver, in order to rectify his error, should surrender these to him, with a discriminative insight. If a striver whose only aim is God realization, gives a serious thought to the topic, he will come to know the truth, that all the acquired things such as the body, rank, right, education, knowledge, riches and property, etc., belong to the world, and so they should be utilized for the world. We may call them either of the world or of nature, or of God, but these are not ours. So how can they be for us? A striver has neither to regard a thing as his, nor has to perform any action for him. The actions, which are performed by him for himself, bind him, because the Lord declares, one is bound by actions other than those performed for the sake of sacrifice. Yajvaya, Gita 3:9. Actions including the stored ones of the person who performs them for the sake of sacrifice are dissolved entirely. Gita 4:23. God is the Almighty Lord of all the worlds. Gita 5:29. When a man regards himself as the Lord of his objects and possessions, he forgets the real Lord, and thinks of those objects and possessions. Therefore, a striver should live like a servant to the Lord, who is the only master of the entire universe. By becoming an instrument in his hands, he should perform his duty, with the body, senses, mind, intellect and material bestowed upon him by him, without having any pride of ownership. Having surrendered everything in action to God, he should not be swayed by the pairs of opposites, such as profit and loss, honor and dishonor, pleasure and pain, etc. because these are the gifts of God and so they are his. Performance of duty, joyfully, under the available circumstance means, the practice of his teaching. The Lord seems to say to Arjuna, that he was ordering him in clear terms to surrender actions to him. By obeying him, he will undoubtedly be released from bondage. Moreover, if other people also, whom he has not ordered this way, practice his teaching, they will also be released from bondage even though they may not believe in him. Appendix: the Lord's opinion is the real and foremost principle, within which all views and doctrines are included. The Lord, without pride, with a simple and polite heart, calls his principle, Siddhanta, as opinion, Mata. It means that the Lord has not insisted upon his opinion or the opinion of anyone else, but he has put forth his view, being impartial. An opinion is not universal but it is personal. Everyone can express his opinion, but a principle is the basic and supreme truth of universal character which everyone has to follow. Therefore there can be difference of opinion between the teacher and the pupil, but there can't be difference in principle. Sages, hermits and philosophers name their opinion as principle, but in the Gita the Lord names his principle as Mata, opinion. There are differences in the opinions of sages, hermits, philosophers and teachers etc., but the Lord's opinion, viz., principle, is universally accepted without any difference of opinion. But those who demur at my teaching and do not follow it, deluded of all knowledge and discrimination, know them to be doomed to destruction. 32 Comment: having shown the advantage of practicing his teaching, in the 31st verse, here the term too, but, has been used, to distinguish those who do not follow his teaching, from those who do follow. Some people hold that as worldly, selfish people, want to acquire worldly objects and also want to get profit themselves. Similarly, the Lord wants all actions to be surrendered to him and also that he should be regarded as the Lord. Those who think so, find fault with his teaching. Similarly, those who think that in worldly affairs, desire is a must, and it is impossible to renounce attachment, aversion and a feeling of mind, also slight his teaching. Those people who hanker after worldly pleasures and prosperity and regard the body, objects and actions etc., as theirs, and for them, do not follow his teaching. Sarvajaya 4 those who do not follow the Lord's teaching are under delusion regarding worldly knowledge, sciences, arts etc. They remain engrossed in inventions and scientific discoveries, like motor cars, aeroplanes, radios, televisions etc. Similarly, they remain engaged in knowing about painting, architecture, arts, crafts, mystical formulas, incantations, implements, different scripts and languages, custom traditions and other developments. They are fully convinced that there is nothing beyond these things. Gita 16:11. Such people are said to be under delusion regarding knowledge. Asatasa: they are devoid of discrimination, because they cannot distinguish the real from the unreal, righteous from unrighteous, salvation from bondage and so on. They remain ignorant, like animals, of vain hopes, of vain actions, of vain knowledge and senseless, they verily are. Gita 9:12. Know those human beings who do not follow the Lord's teaching, to be doomed to destruction. It means that they will be subjected to the cycle of birth and death. A man can attain salvation up to the time of death. Gita 8:5. Therefore, those people who do not follow the Lord's teaching in this life at present can follow it at some time in future because of good company etc., and can attain salvation. But if they do not follow his teachings even up to death, they should be known to be doomed to destruction, because they are deprived of God realization. He who does not follow the Lord's teaching, performs actions out of attachment and aversion, which are his foes. Gita 3:34. Transient objects and actions perish, but a man while performing actions, comes under the sway of attachment and aversion, which lead him to lower births and hells. Therefore, the Lord declares that such a man will be doomed to destruction. In the 31st verse, the Lord declares that those who follow his teachings are released from the bondage of actions, while in this verse he declares that those who do not follow his teaching are to be doomed to destruction. It means that the Lord urges upon people to follow his teachings, even if they do not believe in him. If they do not follow his teaching, they will be doomed too. But if a striver, believing in him, follows his teaching, he offers himself to him. If he, without believing in him, follows his teaching, he leads him to salvation. It means that he who believes in him, attains his love, while he who follows his teaching, attains salvation. Link, why are those people, who do not follow the Lord's teaching, doomed to destruction? The Lord answers the question in the next verse. Even a wise man acts in accordance with his nature. All beings follow their own nature. What them can restraint do? 33. Comment. All actions are performed, either according to one's own nature or according to the Lord's principles, scriptural injunctions. One's nature can be of two kinds, either free from attachment and aversion, or having attachment and aversion. If a man, on his way, happens to see a notice board, his casting a glance at it is neither because of attachment nor aversion, nor from an angle of principle. It happens through his pure personal nature. We read a letter received from a friend, with some feeling of attachment, while that of an enemy with aversion. We study sacred texts such as the Gyro and the Ramayana, according to the Lord's principle. The only aim of human life is God realization. Therefore, actions which are performed with the aim of God realization are performed according to his principles, i.e., according to the scriptural injunctions. All actions, such as seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, etc., are performed according to one's nature and according to his principle. Nature, free from attachment and aversion, is not faulty, while nature with attachment and aversion is. Actions, which are performed out of attachment and aversion, bind a man because they make his nature impure. On the other hand, actions which are performed according to God's principles lead to salvation, because these purify one's nature. It is because of impure personal nature that the assumed affinity for the world is not renounced. As soon as his nature is purified, the assumed affinity is easily renounced. Actions are automatically performed by the so-called body of a wise man, because he has no sense of doership. All actions of a striver, whose aim is God realization, are performed according to the scriptural injunctions. As a greedy person is always careful that he should not sustain any loss, a striver is always careful lest he should perform an activity with attachment or aversion. By being careful, a striver's nature is purified and consequently, he is liberated from the bondage of his actions. Although all actions are performed by modes of nature, yet an ignorant man, whose mind is deluded by egoism, thinks that he is the doer. Gita 3:27. Affinity for objects and actions gives birth to attachment and aversion, which lead him on to the cycle of birth and death. But he who has no affinity for nature, prakriti, sees that the self is not the doer. Gita 13:29. It is attachment for material objects, which influences a person to perform evil actions. For a striver, attachment is the main cause of bondage. Attachment dwells in assumed egoism, and appears in mind, intellect, senses and sense objects. Egoism is of two kinds. When a self, soul, identifies the self with the insentient, matter, and, the cosmic ego, a mode of nature. Gita 13:5. The latter form, egoism, is flawless, as it is an instrument, like the mind, intellect and senses etc., while the former kind is defective. A wise man does not identify the self with the body, and so all his actions are performed by the modes of nature, i.e., by the latter kind. But an ignorant man, who regards the body as I and mine, and all actions as his and for him, is, because the assumption of actions as his, and for him, causes attachment. A perfect soul, being free from attachment and aversion, acts in accordance with pure nature. He is not swayed by nature. As a learned man speaks a language which he knows, similarly, the Lord also behaves in as the body automatically develops and changes. Similarly, all the actions are naturally performed. But a common man remains engrossed in practical actions because of attachment and aversion, while a wise man, being free from attachment and aversion, does not get engrossed in them. Accordance with his incarnation, as Rama or Krishna or a fish, a tortoise or a hog etc., but does not remain completely under sway of nature, prakriti. Similarly, those enlightened souls who have renounced their affinity for matter, prakriti, may vary in their nature, but are not swayed by it. So, their actions are nothing more than gestures of action, while common men, who have not renounced their affinity for matter, act according to individual natures, natural propensities, and remain completely under its sway. Here the terms Vaisya implies that the nature of a wise man is flawless, and so he is not under the sway of nature, he rather controls nature. Actions bear fruits only when a man performs these with a sense of doership and selfishness. A wise man remains free from the vanity of doership and also from selfishness. So actions performed by him are pure and even ideal. For other strivers, impression of the past and the present births, influence of parents, society, company, education, environment, study, adoration, thoughts, actions and feelings, make up a man's nature. The nature varies from person to person and everyone is free to make it pure. The nature of one enlightened soul varies from that of the other, but it is pure, free from attachment and aversion. So they are not swayed by nature. On the other hand, the ignorant, having attachment and aversion, have to perform actions by force according to their own evil nature, which they themselves have acquired. Nigraha kim kairishyatla. The wise men perform virtuous actions enjoined by the scriptures according to their pure nature, while the ignorant perform evil actions under the sway of their bad nature. When Arjuna wanted to abstain from fighting, the Lord says to him, "Thy nature will compel thee." Gita 18:59. Thou shalt do even against thy will, fettered by thine own acts, born of thy nature. 1860. As a motor car cannot cross the limit of 100 miles per hour in its speed, a wise man cannot act against his pure nature. One with an impure nature is like a damaged car. A damaged car can be repaired in two ways: I, by the driver himself; 2, by sending it to a workshop. Similarly, the impure nature can be purified in two ways: I, through the performance of actions, without attachment and aversion. Gita 3:34. 2, through perfect surrender to the Lord. Gita 18:62. If a motor car functions smoothly, it means that we are not under its control, but if it breaks down it means that we are affected by it. Similarly, a wise man, because of his pure nature, is not under the sway of nature, while an ignorant man, because of his impure nature, has to act under the influence of nature. A man who attaches importance to worldly pleasures and prosperity is sure to have a downfall, even though he may be learned. On the other hand, he who does not attach importance to the insentient matter, prosperity and pleasure, and whose aim is God realization, is surely to have upliftment, even though he is not learned. The reason is that feelings, thoughts and actions of a man whose aim, instead of enjoying worldly pleasures and prosperity, is God realization, are conducive to his uplift, salvation. Therefore, a striver, first of all, should decide upon the goal of his life, God realization. Then, in order to attain that aim, he should perform his duty, being free from attachment and aversion. An easy method of being free from attachment and aversion is that we render service to others with our acquired materials such as body etc., without regarding these as ours and for us, and without expectation of any reward. If a striver does not want to come under the influence of nature, he should perform his duty by fixing an ideal for himself. The ideal, model, can be of two kinds: I, the Lord's teaching; 2, wise men's actions. By following the Lord's teaching or wise men's actions, a striver's nature is purified and he realizes God, who is ever attainable. On the other hand, the man who, without following the Lord's teaching or the wise men's actions, performs actions out of attachment and aversion, is doomed to destruction. Gita 3:32. As we cannot forcibly obstruct the course of a river, but can turn it to another direction, similarly, we can turn the flow of our actions towards the welfare of others. When we perform acts for the welfare of others, then the direction is towards the world, and we, the strivers, are liberated from the bondage of actions. Appendix. Even a wise man acts according to his nature. No one can act without being guided by the circumstantial causes. As a teacher teaches a pupil alphabet, A, B, C, in conformity with the standard of his pupil, similarly a wise man acts and behaves with a common man by putting himself in the latter's situation. Sestate. See, this term means that he does not perform actions but activities are naturally performed by him according to his nature. The shaking of the leaves of a tree is not an action, sin or virtue, bearing fruit. Even so, a man free from the sense of doership has no incentive to perpetrate sinful or virtuous acts. He can never commit a sin or virtue. The wise men remain engrossed in the welfare of others because their nature as strivers has been to do good to others. Sarvabhuta Hidrata. Gita 5.25, 12.4. Therefore though nothing remains to be done, to be known and to be attained by them, yet their nature is to do activities beneficent to all. It means that when by remaining engrossed in the welfare of others, their affinity for the world is totally renounced, they have not to work for the welfare of others but because of the natural inclination of the past, good is naturally done by them as a matter of habit. Link. Every man is born with his own nature. Therefore, he has to act according to his nature. Now, the Lord in the next verse explains how to purify one's nature. Attachment and aversion of man abide in each and every sense object through the feeling of agreeableness or disagreeableness towards its senses. Let no one come under their sway, for they are his waylayers and foes. 34. Comment. Indrasya are the ragadvasvayavastata. Each sense has attraction for a pleasant aspect, ear, eye, skin, tongue and nose for sound, sight, touch, taste and smell respectively, and aversion for an unpleasant one. In fact, attachment and aversion do not abide in the sense objects. If they had abode in the sense objects, the same objects might have been pleasant, desirable, or unpleasant, undesirable, equally, to everyone. But it does not happen. Rain is desirable for a farmer, but not so for a potter. Moreover, the same object is sometimes pleasant, while it is unpleasant at other time, to the same person. Cool air is pleasant in summer but unpleasant in winter. Thus, we have attraction and aversion by regarding these as desirable and undesirable. Therefore, the Lord has declared that attachment and aversion of man abide in the sense objects. In fact, attachment and aversion abide in assumed ego-ness. The assumed affinity for the body is called ego. So the term asane, the expression Rasavarjan Rasopayasya Gita 259 used by Lord Krishna, also denotes that attachment and aversion abide in the assumed ego, in a striver. Long as there is assumed affinity for the body, attachment and aversion exist in ego and appear to be abiding in the intellect, mind, senses and objects of senses. These attachment and aversion in their gross forms have been called desire and anger, from the 37th to the 43rd verses of this chapter. In the 40th verse, it has been said that this desire exists in the senses, the mind and the intellect, because it appears to abide in them, as attachment and aversion appear to subsist in the sense objects. Similarly, attachment and aversion appear to inhabit in senses, mind and intellect. In fact, the senses, the mind and the intellect are merely instruments. So, there is no question of the desire and anger or attachment and aversion existing in them. Besides this, the Lord declares in the 59th verse of the 2nd chapter, the objects of the senses come away from the man who abstains from feeding on them, but the taste for them remains. Even the taste turns away when the Supreme is seen. The Lord assures strivers that they should never be disappointed in the means and ends, if attachment and aversion appear. The scriptures, rather than attachment and aversion, should be the authority for determining what should be done and what should not be done. Gita 16:24. If a striver acts or abstains from action with attachment and aversion, it means that he is affected by attachment and aversion. If a person performs actions, or abstains from actions with attachment and aversion are strengthened. This strengthening leads a man to a downfall. When the striver starts worship, renouncing the worldly affairs, good and bad thoughts of the world come to his mind, and he gets perturbed. The Lord urges him not to be perturbed, because these are perishable, and appear and disappear. In fact, thoughts have no existence of their own, because as a rule what is born must die. In fact, these thoughts do not come to mind, these rather slip away from the mind. Thoughts remain suppressed when a man is busy with worldly affairs, but when he stops his work, the suppressed thoughts have an outlet. Therefore, a striver, without having attachment or aversion, should remain indifferent to these. Similarly, he should have neither attachment nor aversion for persons and things, etc. The means of overcoming attachment and aversion when actions are performed out of attachment and aversion are strengthened, and these are transformed into impure nature. This impure nature brings a man under its sway. Then the actions performed by him bind him. So, during the performance or non-performance of actions, a striver should not come under their influence. This is the means to obliterate attachment and aversion, which is explained here. Previous to this, the Lord also declared another means. The Lord said, "Those who constantly follow this teaching of mine are released from bondage of actions." Gita 3:31. So a striver should follow his teachings, so that he may get rid of attachment and aversion. When a striver surrenders his actions, body, senses, mind, intellect and himself to God, and performs his duty free from desire, egoism and grief, his attachment and aversion perish. So a person should follow his teachings, while he performs actions or abstains himself from actions. The entire universe is an evolute of nature and a body is a fragment of the universe. So long as a man is attached to a body, he comes under the sway of attachment and aversion, while acquiring and abandoning things etc. When actions are performed or abandoned with attachment and aversion, the performance or non-performance of those strengthen attachment and aversion. But if these are either performed or abandoned according to the scriptural injunctions, attachment and aversion perish. If a person does not know the ordinance of the scriptures, he should keep in mind the great sage Vedavyasa's teaching. O men, listen to the gist of righteousness and follow it. The gist is we should not do to others what we do not wish to be done to us. Padma Purana, Srishti, 19:355-56. Liberated souls always follow the scriptural injunctions. That is why Bhisma Pitamaha offered food and water to the manis on Kusa grass, though his father's hand was clearly visible to him. Mahabharata, Anusasena. 84:15-20. Therefore, a striver should perform all actions according to the ordinance of the scriptures. For a striver who wants to get rid of attachment and aversion, the scripture is the authority for determining what should be done. The heart of an enlightened soul, totally free from attachment and aversion, is so pure that his thoughts, feelings and actions are nothing but the ordinances of scriptures, even if he may be illiterate. Thus his words and actions are exemplary. Gita 3:21. And by following such teaching and actions, strivers get rid of attachment and aversion. Some people believe that attachment and aversion are natural tendencies, natural inclinations of the mind, which cannot be wiped out. But it is wrong, as these appear and disappear. When a striver practices spiritual discipline, they become buried as every striver's experience, and whatever grows scarce may perish altogether. The Lord has declared that these come to mind, Hila 2:55, but do not stay there permanently. Moreover, he has called these as modifications, Hila 13:6, which have a beginning and an end, rather than dharmas. Evenness of mind, in the desirable and the undesirable, has been called spiritual discipline, Gita 13:9. Had attachment and aversion been permanent features of the mind, it could not have attained the state of evenness. This means that they come to the mind and can be wiped out. The heart of the person who never renounces righteousness also becomes pure. Great poet Kalidasa, while describing King Dushyanta, declares, where there is doubt, there the inclination of the heart of a virtuous person is the testimony. A man, through discrimination, knows that nature, matter, prakriti and soul, spirit, are different from each other. But, the soul identifies itself with the body, born of nature, and this identification is called ego, I, in which attachment and aversion exist, and both these strengthen egoism. These, attachment and aversion, seem to abide in the intellect, because of which one's own beliefs appear pleasant, while the beliefs of others unpleasant. These seem to abide in the mind, and what one thinks is desirable, while what others think is undesirable. These seem to also in senses, due to which favorable objects seem pleasant, while unfavorable ones appear unpleasant. These may also appear in the objects of senses, sound, touch, sight, taste, smell, as favorable and unfavorable. When egoism, identification of the self with the body, is rooted out, attachment and aversion totally perish, because egoism is their base. I am a servant, I am an inquisitive lamer, I am a devotee, etc. This is how one may feel. These me, a servant, lamer and devotee, reside in the same I in which attachment and aversion coexist. Attachment and aversion abide neither exclusively in inert nor in conscious state. These live only in assumed relation between the inert and conscious, yet these live mainly in the inert. In the state of identification of soul with the matter, the material part is attracted towards matter alone, but it appears also in the conscious soul. Due to this identification, attraction for the insentient matter is attachment. When a striver identifies the self with the body, he feels difficulty in renouncing attachment and aversion. But when he has an eye on the self, he has no difficulty in renouncing attachment and aversion, because these have no existence of their own. These are born only when one identifies the self with the body, etc. If a striver has attachment for good company, adoration and meditation, etc., he has aversion for the world. But if he has love, devotion, for God, he will have no aversion for the world, but he will be indifferent to the world. If a man has attachment for one object, he has aversion for another, but when he has love, devotion, for God, he develops dispassion. Dispassion leads to selfless service by wiping out desire for pleasure. Then the body, senses, mind, intellect and ego are automatically engaged in the service of the world. Consequently, attachment and aversion, which abide in ego, totally perish when affinity to the self for the body, etc., along with ego, is renounced. All actions of a person are performed according to his nature or according to scriptural injunctions. If something is done with a view to spiritual progress only, it is done in obedience to the above rule. Nature can be pure, free from attachment and aversion, and impure, with attachment and aversion. It cannot be totally renounced, but it can be purified, i.e., made free from attachment and aversion. As the course of the Ganges cannot be forcibly obstructed, but its direction can be changed, similarly, action cannot be totally renounced, but their flow, course, can be changed, i.e., can be made free from attachment and aversion. This is a vital teaching of the Gita. It is neither the performance nor non-performance of actions, but attachment and aversion, which are the stumbling blocks to a striver's spiritual progress. So, the Lord declares that a wise man is he who has neither attachment for agreeable actions nor aversion for disagreeable ones. Gita 18,110. Generally, strivers, whether a striver has attachment or love, devotion, to holy company, can be illustrated by the following example. If anybody creates an obstacle to a striver's good company, adoration or meditation, and he gets angry with him, it means that he has attachment. But feels sad, it means that he has love. The reason is that there are obstacles to the spiritual discipline when his determination is not firm. So he is sad because of his shortcoming. Similarly, if he is biased against any religion or sect, it means that he is attached to his own religion or sect. In fact, even attachment to the good company, adoration and meditation is not bad, because this spiritual practice leads the mind to the thought of God. Srimad 711:31. Are not on their guard against attachment and aversion. Their activities come under the sway of these. Therefore, a striver should perform actions according to scriptural ordinances in order to be free from attachment and aversion. By doing so, his nature will automatically be improved. When desire mixed with attraction or aversion is born, and we act according to its dictates, attraction and aversion get strengthened, and if we act according to the principles enunciated, these get wiped out. When good and evil thoughts come to the mind of a striver, he should neither have attachment nor aversion for these. He should neither support nor oppose these. He should remain indifferent by thinking that he, the self, is different, and so the self has no affinity for these. If a striver finds himself helpless in renouncing attachment and aversion, he should take refuge in the omnipotent Lord, who is his most disinterested friend. By his grace, he overcomes attachment and aversion, Gita 7:14, and attains supreme peace, Gita 18:62. The assumption is that the body, senses, mind, intellect, ego and all the worldly objects belong to the Lord, take refuge in him. So, a striver should serve him, in order to please him, offer the materials provided by him, without expecting any reward. Expectation of a reward leads to affinity for the insentient matter. Service to others, without expecting any reward, is the means to wipe out attachment and aversion. All our possessions, including the physical, subtle and causal bodies, as well as ego, are to render service to the world, because these are essentially the same, as is the world. An assumption that these are different from the world leads to bondage. A striver should not derive pleasure out of things and actions, with a physical body, out of thinking, with the subtle body, and out of trance with the causal body. In fact, this human body is not for pleasures. Manasa 744:1. Secondly, the body, senses, mind, intellect and objects etc., with which service is rendered, are fragments of the world. How can fragments of the world be ours when the world is not ours? We cannot render service to others with these in a disinterested way, if we regard these as ours. Therefore, we should regard these as, of those whose service is rendered with these. A devotee surrenders these to God, by regarding these as his. Similarly, a Kanagi surrenders these to the world, by regarding these as the world's. A vital fact pertaining to service: he alone can render true service to others, who never requires anything for himself. The desire for money in lieu of service, is no doubt a desire, but an inclination to serve, is also a desire, because it results in a desire for riches. A striver should not have a desire to acquire money, even for rendering service to others. If he gets an opportunity, he should render service according to his resources, but he should have no desire to render service. He who derives pleasure by rendering service to others, or has the sentiment that people are benefited by him, or expects honor and praise, or gets pleased by receiving honor and praise, in reality enjoys pleasures, instead of rendering true service. If a striver derives pleasure out of this, it gives birth to attachment and desire. In fact, the objects with which he renders service to others, belong to them. So, there is no obligation if their trust property is returned to them. Does anyone want reward for having washed his face with his own hands? Question: how can service be rendered without objects and money etc.? So, what is the harm if anyone desires money and objects, in order to render service to others? Answer: service, with material objects is a gross type of service. Real service is a sentiment or feeling, and not an action. Action leads to bondage, while service releases from bondage. A sense of service impels a man to use his possessions in the service of others. Real service is rendered through feelings, rather than through actions. A man of generous feelings can render service even with limited resources he has. He who attaches importance to objects cannot render service with these, because he has pride in doing so, and thus he derives pleasure out of his action, whether he knows it or not. A shopkeeper gives articles to others, but he does not render service, because he has a desire to receive money in exchange. Similarly, money which is paid as tax to the king, state, cannot be called charity. If a person offers charity or food or water to someone, in order to reap its fruit, his affinity for the object is not renounced. But, if he offers the articles, without expecting any reward, it means that he renders service and his affinity for those objects is renounced. Only he who lays claim to a thing, i.e., is the real owner of a thing, can receive such a thing given by us. We repay debt by offering the thing back to him. He who is in greater need of something actually is a deserving hand to receive it. He takes it from us only if it is his, otherwise not. He who renders service to others from his heart arouses feelings of service in their hearts also. If this feeling is not aroused in their hearts, it means that there has been a flaw, such as of reaping the fruit, in the service. A striver should be on the alert in this respect. While rendering service, he should never expect to be called virtuous or good, because this feeling develops pride in him. A striver should live in the world, in order to render service to others by performing his duty. He should never cause any harm to anyone, in the least. He should share the joys and sorrows of others, because that gives them moral strength, that there is someone who is sharing their joys and sorrows. In this way, happy men will become happier and the sad will be consoled. He should console the sad, by quoting Lord Rama, King Nala and King Harishcandra etc., who had to face adverse situations, though they were very noble and virtuous. Moreover, there are many others who are in a more pitiable condition. Thus one should try to console them, be prepared to help them and remain engaged in their welfare, by having good feelings. Those who share the pleasures and pains of others, are saints. Manasa 738:1. Now a doubt may arise, that we shall never be free from sorrow, if we share the sorrow of other people, because the world is full of it. To share the sorrow of others means to have the feeling to alleviate their suffering and to make efforts for it. This will give us happiness, rather than make us sad. The explanation is, that other people will also share our sorrows, i.e., they will try to help us in doing away with our sorrow. So, we should try to share the sorrow of others from our heart, and according to our resources. When we share their sorrow, all our resources are automatically utilized to relieve them of their sorrow and suffering. It is beyond our power to make others happy, but it is up to us to use our resources in order to help the sad in removing their sorrow. This renunciation of the means of happiness will bring us peace of mind. A striver should always have the feeling that no one should ever suffer in the least. Everyone is free in having such generous feeling. This feeling is a service itself. Actions and objects are limited, while feeling of generosity is unlimited. So a striver can attain the unlimited Lord by unlimited feelings. How can he be attained by the limited resources such as actions and objects? Therefore, those whose possessions and resources are limited can also render great service by having generous feelings. A striver who does not regard the body, senses, mind and intellect etc. as his, can share the joys and sorrows of others. In fact, the body, senses, mind and intellect each are neither his nor for him. Similar is the case with objects, resources and persons. These are also not his personal property. Everyone, whether he is rich or poor, educated or uneducated, can renounce this assumed affinity for these. As soon as this assumed affinity is renounced, and one renders service to others by those things regarding them as theirs, he gets rid of attachment and aversion easily. Tau hyacea parapanthina. In the spiritual discipline, attachment and aversion are the waylayers to rob a striver of his spiritual property. But a striver does not pay heed to this fact. Therefore, he does not progress in the spiritual field as much as he should have. Generally, strivers complain that they cannot concentrate their minds on God. But this lack of concentration is not such a stumbling block as are attachment and aversion. When attachment and aversions are renounced, the mind can easily concentrate. Total renunciation of actions pertaining to one's nature is beyond a striver's power, but their performance without attachment and aversion is within his power. So, the Lord urges strivers not to come under their sway, for these are his waylayers. In fact, attachment and aversion are naturally perishing. But a striver, by holding that they dwell in him, accepts their existence and then acts by coming under their influence. So he does not get rid of them. If he holds that they do not dwell in him and so he does not act, being swayed by them, these will automatically perish. Appendix. When we assume that others are instrumental in providing pleasure and pain to us, then attachment and aversion ensue, viz. we get attached to the thing which we think provides pleasure to us and have aversion to the thing which provides pain to us. Therefore attachment and aversion are born by one's own error. There is no other reason. It is because of attachment and aversion that we fail to perceive the world as the manifestation of God, but we view it as insentient, inert, and perishable. If attachment and aversion are rooted out, it is not insentient but all manifests as God. Vasudhavasarvam, Gita 7:19. When evils such as attachment and aversion appear, one should not come under their sway, viz. he should not perform forbidden actions being swayed by them, being affected by them. If actions are performed, the evils, flaws, will be strengthened. But if actions are not done being swayed by them, the man will be filled with enthusiasm. For example, if anyone uttered bitter words to us but we didn't get angry, we would be filled with enthusiasm and joy that we could escape anger. But we should hold that it was not done by our own power but by God's grace, otherwise we would have been overpowered by it. If a striver perceives any defect, he should not be under its sway and should not assume it in him. If attachment and aversion had existed in the self, they would have remained as long as the self had existed. But this is everyone's experience, that we ever exist, but attachment and aversion don't stay forever. They are fleeting. Attachment and aversion can't have an access taught self because the self-s category is quite different from that of attachment and aversion. He, who knows the fleeting nature of attachment and aversion, is different from them. Therefore attachment and aversion are different from us, and they are also different from the mind and intellect etc., in which they make a visit. Manigatan, Gita 2:55. This expression means that a man should not be attached to desirable or undesirable circumstances but should make proper use of them, viz. In desirable circumstances he should serve others, while in undesirable circumstances he should give up the desire for favorable circumstances. The expression Tayoma Vasamagakit means that he should not be happy and sad in favorable and unfavorable circumstances. To feel happy and sad means to be attached to the fruit of action, and the person who is attached to the fruit of action gets tied down. Fail Sakno Nibadyat, Gita 5:12. Link. When we rise above attachment and aversion, what should we do and what should we refrain from doing? The Lord answers this question in the verse that follows. Better is one's own duty, dharma, though devoid of merit, than the duty of another well performed. Better is death in one's own duty, than of another, which is fraught with danger. 35. Comment. The duty of another person according to his caste, order of life, etc., may outwardly seem full of merit, be easy to perform, be attractive, provide riches, comforts, honor and praise, etc., and enable one to live with comfort throughout his life, yet as forbidden to him. These are fraught with fear, pain. On the other hand, one's own duty, according to one's caste and order of life, may be devoid of merit, be difficult to perform, not appealing and not providing riches, comforts, honor or praise, etc., and may be painful throughout life, yet these should be performed without expecting any reward, as these leads to salvation. Therefore, a person should always perform his duty, without expecting any reward, without a sense of mine and without attachment. Performance of duty, for a man is but natural and innate. A man is born, according to his actions, and actions are decided, by his birth. Gita 18:41. Through the performance of his own duty, he attains perfection. Gita 18:45. Therefore, one should not give up one's duty ordained by one's nature, even if it seems. The term Jaya Ayasi, superior 3:1, used in the question Putbi Arjuna and the term Srayan are synonymous. It means that the Lord has answered Arjuna's question in this verse with particular attention. To be tainted with blemish. Gita 18:48. Arjuna thinks, it is better to live in this world by begging, than to fight. Gita 2:5. So the Lord makes it clear to Arjuna, that begging, being the duty of a beggar, is not his duty, because he is a Kshatriya, a member of the warrior class, and not a beggar. In the first chapter, when Arjuna said that only sin would accrue to them by fighting, 136, the Lord said, that having abandoned his own duty and forfeited his fame, he would incur sin, 233. Further, the Lord declared, treating alike pleasure and pain, gain and loss, victory and defeat, engage thou in battle thus, thou shalt not incur sin, 238. In the 18th chapter also he declares, better is one's own duty though devoid of merit, than the duty of another well performed, and he who performs his duty ordained by one's own nature, incurs no sin, 1847. It means, that a man incurs sin only when duty is performed with attachment and aversion. When the striver performs his duty scrupulously, being free from attachment and aversion, he realizes equanimity, which leads him to freedom from sorrow and pain. Gita 6:23. So the Lord urges Arjuna, time and again, to perform his duty of fighting without attachment and aversion. By performing his duty he would be detached from actions, develop dispassion, and attain the goal of life. Through the selfless performance of duty, actions flow towards nature, prakriti, and so a striver has no affinity for these. Therefore, a striver should perform his duty, with the view to root out attachment, for actions. Lord Krishna is convincing Arjuna that having taken birth in the warrior class and fighting is his duty, he had to treat alike victory and defeat, gain and loss, and pleasure and pain, believing that he had no concern as such with war, but he had to act in order only, to remove attachment with actions. The body, senses, mind, intellect and matter, etc., are meant for performing duty alone. One's duty done according to one's caste and order of life, even though it may appear devoid of merit, leads to salvation. A Kshatriya's duty of fighting, which involves violence, may seem devoid of merits as compared with that of a Brahmanas, such as serenity, self-restraint, austerity, purity and forgiveness, etc. Yet a Kshatriya, member of the warrior class, should fight, as it will lead him to salvation. According to one's caste and order of life, etc., outwardly actions, duties, may seem terrible or mild, but these are performed with the only aim of God realization. When a person forgets the real aim of life, i.e., God realization, and attaches importance to worldly objects, actions seem terrible or mild to him. Under no circumstances should one discard his duty. It people ever gained comfort, pleasure, property, riches, honor and praise etc. by performing their duty. There could be seen crowds of righteous people. But duty is not performed keeping in view pleasure or pain, but it is performed according to the teachings of the Lord or the scriptures, without expecting any reward. So, while performing his duty, if a striver suffers pain, that pain leads him to his spiritual progress. In fact, that pain is not pain, but is penance or austerity, which is conducive to progress, as penance is performed for one's own self, while duty is performed for others. Penance which is performed intentionally, does not prove so beneficial, as penance, in the form of pain, which comes uninvited. Those who die while performing their duty, become immortal. From the worldly point of view also, it is observed, that those who do not deviate from their duty in spite of suffering pain, are admired and honored. Patriots who suffered tortures, went to jail and were hanged, in order to make the country independent, are praised and honored even today. On the other hand, those who are sent to jail, because of their crimes are condemned and dishonored. It means, that the person who performs his duty without expecting any reward, may suffer pain and even may meet with death, but that pain wins honor and praise here, and leads him to salvation hereafter, because he has an eye on righteousness. Question: how to know for certain, that death while performing one's own duty, leads only to salvation? Answer: the Gita is a gospel of Lord Krishna himself. So, there should not arise any doubt about his teaching. Secondly, it is a matter of faith and belief, rather than reasoning, yet some aspects clarify the doubts. Whatever is not known to us should be decided by the scriptures. It is mentioned in the scriptures, that he who protects righteousness, is protected by the righteous. Manusmriti 8:15, i.e., righteousness leads him to salvation. Therefore, the responsibility of salvation of a person who follows righteousness falls on the righteous and the preachers of righteousness, such as God, the Vedas, the scriptures and the sages and ascetics. It is their power which leads one to salvation. In the scriptures, it is mentioned that a chaste woman attains salvation. She does not attain salvation because of the virtues of her husband and his power, but because of the power of the Lord, the Vedas and the scriptures etc., who have made this law, ordinance. There is no doubt about it. 2. History also reveals the fact, that he who performs his duty with righteousness attains salvation. King Harishcandra did not deviate from truth, in the face of adversity, insult and dishonor. Consequently, he along with his subjects attained the supreme abode, Markandeya Purana, Devibhagavata etc. 3. Nowadays we come across many incidents of rebirth, which reveal that creatures take to higher or lower births according to their good or bad deeds. The scripture which removes doubts and reveals secrets, gives us all the light of knowledge. Therefore, he who has no knowledge of the scriptures, is blind. T. Kalyana Monthly Magazine 43rd year, 1968, Paraloka or Punarjan Fuika, special issue pertaining to the next world and the next birth. 4. Not to speak of a believer, even a non-believer, by performing his duty scrupulously, without any selfish motive, gains peace or joy, which is a characteristic of the mode of goodness. This peace is a signal for salvation or the supreme peace. Therefore, our own experience proves that performance of one's duty while discarding forbidden actions leads to salvation. A vital fact: it is the real duty of a man, the self, being a fragment of the Lord, to attain salvation and to believe that he is only the Lord's and only the Lord is his. Even duty, according to one's caste, stage of life and body etc., are not real duties because these are assumed, and are not of the self. In all of these, a man has to depend on others, while in one's own real duty, he is totally independent and without the least dependence on anyone. Therefore, a striver himself may be a lover, a seeker of knowledge or a devotee, as he has not to depend on anyone else. A lover, transmuted by love, becomes one with the beloved. A seeker of knowledge, transmuted by knowledge, becomes one with him who is all knowledge, and a servant changed by service, becomes one with the master. Similarly, a striver transformed by sadhana, spiritual discipline, becomes one with God. A striver having the aim of God realization, does not hanker after riches, honor, praise, comforts and luxuries. He is not at all worried about these, nor is he pleased having acquired them, because his aim is only God realization, rather than acquisition of riches, honor and praise etc. So all the worldly actions are performed scrupulously and solemnly, for the Lord's sake by him. As a businessman, takes a lot of trouble, to earn more and more money, and as a patient, undergoes an operation happily, in order to recover from a disease a striver remains pleased and satisfied, even in defeat, loss and pain, in order to attain his aim of God realization. For him, the desirable and the undesirable circumstances are the means to practice spiritual discipline. When a striver, having resolved to realize God, starts performing his duty scrupulously, he does not deviate from the performance of his duty, even in the face of adversity. He faces that adversity happily, taking it to be a penance. When a striver assumes the body as I and mine, it submits to attachment and aversion. While coming under the sway of attachment and aversion, a man strays away from his duty. Had the body been I, the self, it would have remained with the self, or the self would have been destroyed with the destruction of the body. But it is not so. Similarly, if the body had been mine, nothing would have remained to be acquired, after acquiring it. But, the desire to acquire more, continues. It means that the real thing has not yet been acquired, and the acquired things, such as the body etc., are not mine. How can the body be mine, when I have neither brought it with me, nor can carry it with me, nor can change it as I desire? Thus, every striver knows that a body is neither he nor his. But the strivers do not attach importance to this knowledge, so they cannot get rid of attachment and aversion. If a striver sometimes happens to feel a body as I and mine, he should, instead of attaching importance to this feeling, give importance to his knowledge. By this, he realizes the self, and then he gets rid of attachment and aversion. Being free from attachment, the knowledge of what ought to be done and what ought not to be done is naturally revealed in his mind, and accordingly actions are performed. Though the performance of duty of another appears easy, yet it is fraught with fear, i.e., its consequence is disastrous. Having discarded selfish motive, if a man performs his duty for the good of others, there is no fear for him, from many quarters. Question: having described the duties of Brahmanas, priest class, Kshatriyas, warrior class, Vaisyas, trader class, and Sudras, labor class, in the 42nd, 43rd and 44th verses respectively, the Lord, in the first half of the 47th verse declared, "Better is one's own duty destitute of merit, than the duty of another well performed." According to the present verse, the duty of another is said to be fraught with fear. Therefore, the duty of a Brahmana should be disastrous for others, such as the Kshatriya etc. But scriptures advise all people to inculcate the inborn qualities of a Brahmana in their lives. Why? Answer: controlling of the mind and senses etc. Gita 13:7, 11, 16, 1-3, are common duties, which should be performed by everyone. These are natural duties for a Brahmins, so he can perform these easily, while members of other castes may not perform these so easily. Common duties are also a part and parcel of natural duties. Besides the common duties, when a man performs duties born of his nature, he does not incur sin, though it may appear that he incurs sin. For example, if a Kshatriya fights valiantly without selfishness and malice, by regarding it as his duty he incurs no sin. The Lord declares, "He who performs his duty ordained according to his nature, incurs no sin." 1847. Besides common duty and one's own duty, the duty of another is fraught with fear, because it is prohibited by Scripture. It will deprive other persons of their rightful means of livelihood, and it will lead him to hell. Therefore, the Lord asks Arjuna to perform his duty of fighting, which is better than begging. Begging is prohibited for Arjuna. Being a Kshatriya, it is not beneficial for him. A vital fact pertaining to one's duty and the duty of others' nature, Prakriti, and its evolute, body and world, are different from God and the self, soul. Duty of the self is one's duty, while the duty of nature, the body and the world, is the duty of another. Absence of modification, flawlessness, imperishability, eternity, desirelessness and non-attachment, are duties of the self, while modifications, flaws, transitoriness, mortality and desires for pleasures, prosperity, honor and praise etc., are the duties of the body and the world, and therefore, are the duties of another. The duty of the self is imperishable, because the self is imperishable, while the duty of the body is perishable, as the body ever undergoes change. Renunciation, the discipline of action; knowledge, the discipline of knowledge; and love, the discipline of devotion, being axiomatic, are one's own duty. These need no practice, as practice is done by the body, and whatever has affinity for the body is the duty of another. To be united with God is one's own duty, while to be a pleasure seeker is the duty of another. To remain detached is one's duty, while to be attached is the duty of another. To render service is one's own duty, while to have desire is the duty of another. To be a lover is one's own duty, while to be passionate is the duty of another. It means that whatever is connected with the self is one's own duty, while whatever is connected with nature, prakriti, is the duty of another. One's own duty is sentient, while the duty of another is insentient. The self is a fragment of God, while the body is a fragment of nature, prakriti. The desire for self-realization and God's realization is the duty of the self, because the self is a fragment of God, while the desire for pleasure and prosperity is the duty of another, paradharma. This desire for pleasure and prosperity is aroused by accepting affinity for an unreal body. A desire for one's ultimate good is one's duty, because being a fragment of God, one's own desire is the desire of God himself, and not that of the world. A man is independent in performing his own duty of God's realization or self-realization or salvation, because in this there is no need of body, senses, mind and intellect etc., but only the need to sever connection with them. In performing duty for another, a man is dependent because that needs the body, senses, mind, intellect, things and persons etc. When a man practices spiritual discipline in order to realize God, without accepting his affinity for the body, his practice is his own duty. All the means followed, in order to attain self-realization or God realization, are included in one's own duty, svadharana, while all the actions done for the world are included in the duty for another, paradhana. Thus, practicing the three disciplines, action, knowledge and devotion, is a man's own duty, while hankering after worldly pleasures and prosperity, having accepted affinity for the body, is the duty of another. All the virtuous actions such as a pilgrimage, fast, penance, meditation and trance etc., performed with physical, subtle and causal bodies, with the expectation of reward, i.e., with a selfish motive, come to be paradhana, the duty of another. But if these are performed for the welfare of others, without expecting any reward, these become svadhana, one's own duty. The reason is that the self is desireless, while desire is born by having affinity for nature, prakrti. So, when a man having desire performs his duty, it becomes the duty of another. One's own duty leads to salvation, while the duty of another leads to bondage. Every man having a disinclination for the duty of others should perform his own duty of God realization or self-realization, for which this human body has been bestowed upon him. As far as the performance of duty of another is concerned, it can be performed in lower births as also heaven etc., where the only aim is the enjoyment of pleasures. A man is independent and capable of performing his own duty, while he is dependent and incapable of performing the duty of another. He is sad when he has a desire to acquire worldly objects, and depends on them having acquired them. This dependence is paradhana, the duty of another. But, when there is no desire, there is no question of any want or dependence. That is svadhana, one's own duty. While performing one's own duty, a man may have to undergo a lot of suffering adversity, and even may lose his life, but it will lead him to salvation, God realization, while the duty of another, even though full of merit and easy to perform, is fraught with danger, i.e., leads him to the cycle of birth and death. All the pains, sorrows and worries etc., of the world, are borne by the performance of the duty of another, while the performance of one's own duty leads him to the eternal bliss. Appendix: according to his birth and actions, whatever a striver assumes himself, his dharma, duty, is dharma for him, and whatever is forbidden for him, that is paradharma, duty of another, for him. As a striver assumes himself to be of a particular vama, order of life, and asrama, stage of life, for him the duty of the man of that varna and asrama is dharma. If he thinks himself to be a pupil or a teacher, study or teaching is dharma for him. If he assumes himself to be a servant or inquisitive, jijvayasu, or devotee, then service or inquisitiveness or devotion is svdharma for him. Evils such as theft and violence etc., which involve ill and harm of others cannot be svdharma for anyone, but that is kadharma or adharma. Performance of action in a disinterested way for the welfare of others, viz., karmaga, is svdharma. In the GL svdharma, one's own duty, has been mentioned sahajakarma, svakarma and svavajakarma. Performance of action against one's duty is a kartavya, and not to discharge one's duty is also a kartavya. Neglecting of duty, Gita 2:33. In every dharma these three are there: kadharma, adharma and paradharma. The feeling to harm others and diplomacy etc. are kadharma and dharma. To kill an animal in a sacrifice is adharma and dharma. The dharma of people of other varna and asrama is paradharma and dharma. Kadharma, adharma and paradharma, these three don't lead a person to salvation. The dharma, duty, which involves renunciation of selfishness and pride and welfare of others at present and in future, leads to salvation. Link: why does a man not perform his own duty, when he knows that one's own duty is better, even though devoid of merit, than the duty of another, well discharged? For this Arjuna puts a question. In the verse that follows, Arjuna said, "But why is a man impelled to commit sin, as if by force, even against his will?" 0 Varsaniya. Krishna. 36 Comment: Lord Krishna has been addressed as Varsaniya, because he belonged to the Varsani clan. In the preceding verse, Lord Krishna praised the performance of one's duty, and duty is performed according to one's caste and clan. So Arjuna addresses the Lord as Varsaniya. A sensible man does not want to commit sin, by thinking of its bitter and sad fruit. Here the termination does not mean discarding desire for pleasure and prosperity. It rather stands for the renunciation of desire to commit sin. A sensible man does not want to commit sin, but it is the desire for pleasure and prosperity, which deviates him from the performance of his duty and forces him to perform sinful acts. The expression balativanajita, as if driven by force, has been used to point out the fact that a sensible man, by knowing the bitter fruit of a sinful act, does not want to commit it, yet he is forcibly driven to it. From this, it appears that some force is there, to compel him to commit sins. The root of this sin is desire, for worldly pleasures and prosperity. But a man does not give any heed to this desire, and so he is unable to know the root of evils, sins. He understands that he wants to abstain from committing sins, but some entity is forcibly engaging him in sins. Duryodhana also declares, "I know what is righteousness, but I am not inclined to it. I also know what is unrighteousness, but I cannot get rid of it. There is some deva, force, in my heart, which drives me to act." Garga Samhita, Asvamda. 50:36. The Tennessee deva used by Duryodhana stands for desire, for pleasure and prosperity, which forces him to commit sin, and not to follow righteousness. The expression Kanapre Yukto Yam Papam Karati also shows that he is impelled to commit sin by some other force. The Lord, in the 34th verse, said, "Attachment and aversion, which are subtle forms of desire and anger, are the foes of a striver," i.e., these are the roots of sins. As it was said in a general way, Arjuna could not understand this point. So he puts this question. Arjuna means to ask whether it is lack of faith or carping spirit or villainous nature or clouded understanding or force of one's own nature or attachment and aversion, or disinclination for one's own duty and inclination to the duty of another, described from the 31st verse to the 35th verse, which drives a man to commit sin. Besides these, is it God or fortune or time or circumstance or action or bad company or society or custom or any government law etc., which is impelling him to commit sin? Link: the Lord answers the question in the next verse. The blessed Lord said, "It is desire and it is anger, born of the mode of passion, rajas, most greedy and most sinful. Know this to be the enemy concerned." 37 Comment: the Lord, in the 7th verse of the 14th chapter, declares, "The mode of passion springs from desire and attachment," while here, he declares that desire is born of a mode of passion. It means that desire is born of the mode of passion, while desire enhances passion, attachment. A person believes that worldly objects provide him pleasure, so he has a desire to acquire them in order to enjoy pleasure. This desire gives birth to attachment. So long as this process continues, he cannot get rid of sinful acts. Kama asa krodha asa man, has a desire for sensual pleasure and prosperity. Sometimes, sins are committed under the sway of desire, while other times, these are committed under the sway of anger. Through desire and anger, different types of sins are committed. Therefore, these two terms have been used. This desire is the root of all saint. When it is not I should get this, I should get this, this is desire. Such a desire is known as kama. Though disinclination for God and not attaching importance to discrimination are also the cause of sins, yet here desire has been said to be the root of sins because here in this chapter of the discipline of action, the aim of a striver is to get rid of desire. Satisfied, it gives birth to anger. The singular number has been used for desire and anger in order to explain that only desire is the root of sins. When the desire is satisfied, it gives birth to greed, but if it is not satisfied, it gives birth to anger. If the person, who is a stumbling block to the satisfaction of our desire, is more powerful than we, fear is born instead of anger. Therefore, in the Gila, besides desire and wrath, fear has also been mentioned as delivered from desire, fear and anger. 410, and free from desire, fear and anger. 528. An important fact pertaining to desire: whatever we may desire, does not happen, and whatever we do not desire, happens. This is suffering. Desire is the root of all sins and sufferings. A man with a desire cannot get happiness, even in a dream. Manasa 791. If desire is renounced, there is no question of any suffering. Craving for perishable objects is called desire, while the need for God realization, which may appear to be like desire, is not really desire. The reason is that desire is never satisfied, but it is strengthened by sense enjoyments, while the need of God realization is fulfilled having realized God. A man has desire for something, which is different from him, the self, while God is one with the self. Similarly, the need of rendering selfless service, the discipline of action, self-realization, the discipline of knowledge, and devotion to God, the discipline of devotion, are not desires. In fact, the need of the self, soul, is to realize God, but he, the self, has a desire to acquire the perishable objects etc., because his discrimination is veiled. A doubt may arise here as to how the worldly affairs will go on, without desire. The clarification is, that worldly affairs relate with actions and commodities rather than with desires. Actions are performed outwardly, and so their fruit in the form of objects and circumstances etc., is also external, while desire is internal. Nothing in the world can be acquired by having desire. It is the fruit of effort. People have a desire to become rich, yet they remain poor. All the people, except the liberated souls, have a desire to remain alive, but they die. A man's actions bear fruits, according to his fate or fortune, not because of his desire. Whatever is allotted cannot be blotted, whether you have desire for it or not. As a man has to undergo unfavorable circumstances unwillingly, he would also face favorable circumstances. A man may bear pain, blame and dishonor etc., without any desire. Similarly, he may gain pleasure, praise and honor, without desire as a result of his fate. A man may have a desire for immediate pleasures and prosperity, or for future fruits, for his actions. But a desire is the root of pain, here as well as hereafter, so a man should renounce desire. It is out of desire that a man performs actions. When there is an excess of this desire, it forces him to perform forbidden actions. It is because of desire that he is more attached to the unreal. As soon as he renounces desire, his affinity for the unreal is renounced. When desire is satisfied, we attain the same state in which we were before desire was aroused. When desire, say of receiving 100 rupees, was not aroused in a striver's mind, he was desireless, and again after having received that amount, he becomes desireless. It is because of his attachment to the worldly pleasures that new desires are born. Thus, desire are never satisfied. Some people believe that desires cannot be totally renounced, but the fact is, that desires cannot be maintained. These appear and disappear, have a beginning and an end, and constantly decay. If we do not have new desire, the old desire, whether satisfied or not, disappears itself. Everyone's desires may not be satisfied forever, but these can be renounced forever, because these are transitory. The difficulty in renouncing desire is, that we have a feeling of mine. If we become free from this feeling of mine, we shall become desireless. Desirelessness will lead to detachment. When we become free from the feeling of mine, desire and detachment, we attain uniformity, desirelessness and independence automatically. We must pay attention to this vital fact. We think that it is difficult to renounce desires. But is it easy to satisfy these? It is impossible to satisfy all the desires. Even King Dasaratha, the father of Lord Rama, could not satisfy his desire of not sending his son into exile. Thus, if satisfaction of desires is impossible, and renunciation is difficult, which one is easier, satisfaction or renunciation? The answer is clear, that desires can be renounced rather than satisfied. But we commit an error when we try to satisfy desires, but we do not make efforts to renounce them. Therefore, a striver should renounce desires. Desires are of four kinds. 1. Desires which satisfy necessities of life. 2. Desire which is personal and just, but is beyond our power. Such a desire should be rooted out, by offering it to God. There are 4 criteria for such a desire. It is born at present, as desire for food when one is hungry. 2. The material to satisfy it is available at present. 3. It is impossible to live without satisfying it. 4. Its satisfaction does evil neither to him nor to others. Thus the necessity should be satisfied. When the necessities are satisfied, a man gets strength to renounce desires. But he should not derive pleasure out of the satisfaction of even necessities, otherwise it will be conducive to the birth of new desires which can never be satisfied. There should not be injustice and exploitation in the world. A striver having offered such a desire to God, becomes carefree. The Lord satisfies it if he thinks it proper. 3. Satisfy the just desire of others for their welfare and within our power to satisfy. Thus by satisfying the desires of others, we get strength to renounce our own. 4. Other desires, besides the above-mentioned ones, which can be rooted out, by reflection. Mahusano Mahapatma desire is such an enemy, that is not satiated by sense enjoyments. Pralhazi Dasa in Vinyapatrika declares, this fire of desire is never extinguished by the churned butter of sense enjoyments. 198. As desire for prosperity is never satisfied, similarly, the desire for sense enjoyments is never satisfied, but rather strengthened. So, it has been called all-devouring, and most sinful, because it is the root of all sinful actions, such as theft, robbery and violence etc. As soon as desire is born, it induces man to have a disinclination for his duty, for the self and for God, and an inclination towards perishable world. Consequently, he commits sins, which lead to hell and birth, in lower bodies. It is, because of the desire for sense enjoyments, that the changing and perishable world, body etc., seems real and one seeks pleasure out of it. At the time of enjoyment, he forgets the kaleidoscopic nature of objects and regards these and himself as permanent. Realize this fact, he, instead of getting entangled in the mirage of pleasures, will have his eye directed to God and the self, who are real. It shows that a man enjoys the worldly sense enjoyments, by having a disinclination for the real, God or self, and by enjoying the sense enjoyments, he develops a disinclination for God. Such a depraved one can't avoid violence, for himself as well as for others. When a rich man leads a luxurious life and enjoys worldly pleasures, the poor are sad to see him suffer. Moreover, he, the self, being a fragment of God, is sentient, but when one attaches importance to riches or luxuries, the insentient, he becomes a slave to these and has a downfall. All the worldly materials are limited, so these should be shared by all the people. He, who enjoys the share of others, is a sinner. So a man should have only the bare necessities of life. In the scriptures, it is mentioned that even bare necessities of life should be satisfied, only after offering these to parents, preceptors, children, women and old people etc. A gratifier destroys worldly material, does violence to those who suffer shortage, and leads himself to a downfall, while a wise man, liberated soul, does not do so, because all actions are performed by him according to scriptural injunctions for the maintenance of a body, without expecting any fruit. Gita 4:21-18-17. All the possessions, including the body of such a wise man, are utilized automatically, for the welfare of all beings. The need to maintain the body, is neither all-devouring nor most sinful, and it is satisfied, as hunger, after having a meal. But a desire is never fully satisfied. The more we satisfy it, the more intense it becomes. Vidinamiya Varanamija. In fact, a man attains peace, having renounced the desire for worldly objects. Yet out of ignorance he believes that he has attained peace by acquiring the worldly objects, i.e., by satisfying the desire. Thus, by considering desire to be a source of enjoyment, he regards it as a friend and well-wisher. So, the desire never perishes. Therefore, the Lord urges us to know the desire, to be an enemy, because it, having blurred our discrimination, leads us to sins. Desire is the root of all sins, sufferings and hell, here as well as hereafter. It results in no benefit. An important fact, an important and easy means to get rid of desire is to render service to others with the body, senses, mind, intellect and life breath etc., without any selfish motive. In the discipline of action, actions performed with the physical body, thinking with the subtle body and trance with the causal body, are done only for the world, not for one's own self, because the gross body, the subtle body and the causal body have their identity respectively, with the gross, subtle, and causal world. By doing so, one should not derive any pleasure out of them. It makes him free from attachment to the fruit of action, and thus he easily becomes free from attachment to action. I should be obeyed, this thing may serve my purpose, whatever I say should be honored. These are all desires. A desire is very disastrous. When a man satisfies the just desires of others, according to his resources, it enables him to renounce his own desires. If we cannot fulfill the desires of others, at least we should have the sentiment to do so. Egoism, attachment and desire bind a man to the world, through separation, defect and disquietude, respectively. Renunciation of desire leads to detachment, while detachment leads to non-egoism. A striver, following the discipline of action, does not regard the body, senses, mind, intellect, egoism and objects etc., as his or for him, but he regards these as the world's and for the world, by realizing the reality about them. When a striver resolves not to give pain to others, he starts rendering service to them. If by chance anyone suffers because of his action, he very humbly tenders a sincere apology. Even if the sufferer does not forgive him, he is automatically forgiven by God. While rendering service to others, a striver should never expect any reward in return. By doing so, this enemy, desire, is easily overcome. Appendix: the desire to derive pleasure from a thing. The desire to derive pleasure out of either service or the thought of the welfare of others or trance and to maintain them, is an obstacle to God's realization. Gita 416. Therefore, a striver should be detached from the three modes of goodness, of passion and of ignorance, because the self is free from all attachment. Person or an action is named kama. This evil in the form of kama involves endless flaws, endless defects and endless sins. Therefore, so long as a man has desire, he can't be totally free from flaws, defects and sins. The desire to get pleasure causes evils. He who has no desire becomes free from evils. The fruit of action is of three kinds: pleasant, unpleasant and mixed. Gita 18:12. Out of the three, the fruit of desire that accrues is only unpleasant. Prarabdha does not compel a man to resort to sinful acts, but it is the desire that directs a man to sinful acts. An urge for an activity may be there for enjoyment of fruits of past actions due to prarabdha, but there cannot be any sinful act, as there is no need to commit such a sin for enjoyment of fruits of destiny. Kama, desire, is born of rajoguna, the mode of passion. Therefore the cause of sins is rajoguna and their effect, evolute, is tamoguna, the mode of ignorance. All sins are born of rajoguna. Link: it is a sin even knowing this a man commits sin. What is the reason that this knowledge does not help? The Lord explains in the next two verses. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror by dust, and as an embryo by placenta, so is this knowledge, concealed by desire. 38. Comment: as fire is covered by smoke, so is this knowledge, discrimination, covered by desire. Discrimination is revealed in the intellect. There are three divisions of intellect: of the nature of goodness, sattvika, of passion, rajas, and of ignorance, tamash. The intellect by which one knows what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, is of the nature of goodness. The intellect, by which one wrongly understands what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, is of the nature of passion, while the intellect by which one sees all things in a perverted way, contrary to the truth, is of the nature of ignorance. Gita 18:30-32. When desire is born, even the intellect of goodness, Sattvika, is covered by desire, as fire by smoke. Then the intellect of the mode of passion, Rajas, and ignorance, Tamas, will definitely be covered by it, of which there is no doubt. As soon as a desire is born, one's spiritual path is covered with its smoke. If it is given scope for enhancement, it makes the path totally dark. By thinking that the desired objects are deserting us constantly, we can destroy desires. We have desire to acquire the worldly objects, because these appear to be beautiful and charming. The desire veils our discrimination, which is a privilege of human birth. Just as fire can burn even when it is covered with smoke, so can discrimination work, if a man becomes cautious. As soon as desire is born, a man can get rid of desire at the outset, by thinking of the kaleidoscopic and transitory nature of the worldly objects etc., which he wants to acquire. When dirt accumulates in the surface of a mirror, it cannot reflect an object. Similarly, the dirt of desire covers knowledge, discrimination, and a striver cannot decide what he ought to do and what he ought not to do. Because of desire, he hankers after worldly pleasures and prosperity, and he has a downfall. This is the second stage of desire. A striver should realize that it is not a thing, but its proper use, which is significant. So, instead of having a desire to acquire more and more, he should think to make a proper use of it. Moreover, he cannot acquire objects merely by desire. The less importance he will attach to the worldly objects, the more importance he will attach to God. When he stops attaching importance to the worldly objects altogether, he will realize God and desire will totally be eliminated. When dirt accumulates on the surface of a mirror, even though it does not reflect a face, yet it can be known that it is a mirror. But when an embryo is covered by the placenta, it cannot be known whether the child is male or female. Similarly, knowledge, discrimination, is so much veiled at this third stage, that he totally forgets his duty and his desire is intensified. If desire is not satisfied, it gives birth to anger. From anger arises delusion. From delusion there is destruction of discrimination. From destruction of discrimination one does not do what ought to be done, but indulges in evil acts, such as falsehood, fraud, dishonesty, injustice, oppression and other sinful acts. The Lord does not want to call such people human beings, men. Therefore, the Lord, while describing such people, in the 16th chapter, from the 8th to the 18th verses, has not used any such word which stands for human beings. The Lord has called the people who have heaven as their goal, Kamatmana, desire incarnate, Hila 2143, because they are the embodiments of desires. Having identified themselves with desires, they hold that there is no higher aim than the gratification of desires. Gita 16111. When desires are strengthened, a man totally forgets that the real aim of human life is God realization. But if due to past influences or good company, or any other factor, he comes to know the real aim of human life, he can attain salvation or God realization. In this verse, the Lord has given 3 illustrations pertaining to the covering of discrimination by desire. It means that discrimination is covered by desire in 3 stages. But those who hold that desire is the cause of happiness, and so depend on it, cannot renounce it, desire, while strivers who practice spiritual discipline, know it in its reality and can root it out. The Lord here has described the 3 stages of desire, so that a striver may kill the enemy, in the form of desire, as directed by him, in the 41st and 43rd verses of this chapter. In fact, desire crosses the first 2 stages so quickly, that a man cannot perceive these phases. Then desire leads him to all sorts of sins and sufferings. Therefore, a striver, through discrimination, should not allow a desire to arise. But if it is born, it should be renounced either in the first or the second stage. It should not be allowed to reach the third stage. An important fact as smoke shows the presence of fire, and as a mirror and an embryo are identified even when these are covered respectively with dust and placenta, so discrimination is possessed by every human being, even when it is covered by desire. But due to the force of desire, discrimination is not used. According to the scriptures, mala, sin, impurity, vikspa, distraction, and avarana, veil, are said to be the three stumbling blocks to God realization. These defects are born of the affinity of man for the unreal world. This affinity for the world is created because of desire. Thus the root of all the evils is desire. When desire is renounced, affinity for the unreal world is renounced. When affinity for the unreal is renounced, all the evils perish and discrimination is revealed. So long as the worldly objects seem real, beautiful and charming, a man attaches importance to them. This attachment is the main obstacle to God realization, as it is conducive to the three defects: sin, confusion and veil. Out of these three, sin is regarded as the most deadly defect. Desire is the root of sin. When a striver resolves not to commit sin in future, the defects are rooted out and his sin begins to decay. But when he renounces the desire totally, all his sins perish. In the Srimad Bhagavata, Lord Krishna has pointed out that a man with desire can attain salvation by following the discipline of action, performance of action, without expecting fruit. Kanagastakamanam, 1,112,017. So a person who is not free from desire need not lose heart, because only he who has a desire will get rid of it. Desires can be renounced easily through the discipline of aktiyap. When a striver performs any act, whether it is mundane or spiritual, he should think, why do I perform it and how do I perform it? By thinking so, he will constantly have an eye on the aim of his life. Consequently, he will perform only virtuous actions, being free from attachment and the desire for fruit. This performance of actions without attachment and desire for reward will lead him to salvation. Appendix: desire is the main obstacle to God realization. As there is a jar full of water, in it we have to do two actions. The first is to empty the jar and the second is to fill it with ether. But in fact two actions are not to be performed, but only one is to be performed: to empty the jar. Empty the jar and the ether will be filled itself. Similarly, renunciation of desire and God realization, these two are not to be done. Renounce the desire and God will be automatically realized. It is because of desire that God seems to be unrealized. O Arjuna, knowledge, Joanna, is enveloped by this constant enemy of the wise, a discerning soul, in the form of desire, which is insatiable like fire. 39. Commentating: this term has been used for desire, which has been declared by the Lord as most sinful, in the 37th verse of this chapter. Dus Purinalina ca, as fire is never satiated, when clarified butter is added to it, it rather rages stronger, so is desire never satisfied. By enjoying the objects of desire, it is rather strengthened. Srimad Bhagavatam 9:19-14 Manusmriti 294. The fire of desire devours everything which comes into its contact. Sunday Radhasa has also expressed the same idea, when he says, the richer a man grows, the more he hankers after worldly prosperity. A poor man may desire to gain only a few rupees, but when he gains them, he has desire for 100 and then 1,000. And after that 1,000,000 and then 1,000,000,000 and trillion and then the ownership of the entire universe. Yet, this form of desire will not be satiated. It is only by contentment that this desire can be subdued. A poor man is not so greedy as is a rich man. When a man earns 100 rupees, he desires to earn 1,000 rupees. It means that he feels that he needs 900 more. When he earns 1,000 rupees, he desires to have 10,000 rupees. It means that he needs 9,000 more. When he gains 10,000 rupees, he has desire to gain 1,00,000 of rupees, and he needs 90,000 more. Thus the richer he grows, the more greedy he becomes. On the other hand, a contented man, being free from all desires, is the king of kings. In fact, it is not wealth, but desire for wealth, which is an obstacle to God realization. This desire deprives the rich and the poor equally of God realization, as it can never be satiated. A man can only get rid of it by renouncing it. Kamarfalpina is the desire to derive pleasure out of the affinity for the insentient is called kama. This desire manifests itself in different forms, such as lust for gold, power and of the flesh, craving for things, attachment to loving enchanting objects, hope to acquire something, and greed, to acquire more and more. When a man's desire is intensified, it is followed by solicitation. These are the different forms of desire. Here, the term jnana stands for the wise striver, who remains engaged in practicing the spiritual discipline, because it is he who recognizes this enemy in the form of desire, and slays it. The worldly people consider it as pleasant. The Lord declares that desire is the constant enemy of a wise striver. As soon as desire is born, a thought comes to his mind that it will lead him to suffering. Desires involve dependence on the world and create importance of the world, which are stumbling blocks to the spiritual path. It pricks him at the outset that it will result in adversity. The ignorant, who are engrossed in sensual pleasures, hold that desire is their friend, because they derive pleasure out of the objects. Without desire, objects cannot provide pleasure, but the fact is that desire and the pleasures lead him to sorrow, suffering, imprisonment and hell, etc. Thus, desire is a constant enemy of the ignorant also, but they are not aware of it, while wise strivers are aware of it. Every being is endowed with discrimination. In the case of man it can develop, but in birds, beasts and other births, it is confined to the maintenance of the body. In the case of men also, it is veiled by desire, which does not let them follow the spiritual, sentient path of God realization, but keeps them engaged in mundane pleasures. Everyone likes loving and true words, and hates harsh and false words. It means that every person has the knowledge, discrimination, of good and bad, virtue and vice, right and wrong. In spite of this knowledge, an ignorant person uses harsh language, tells a lie and does not perform his duty scrupulously, because his discrimination is concealed by desire. A man thinks that he derives joy out of sense objects, but in fact, he gets joy by renouncing them. Everyone knows that during wakefulness and sleep a man feels happy and sad, because of his affinity for the sense objects. But during sound sleep he does not remember sense objects at all. So, when he awakes he says that he had a very peaceful and sound sleep. Moreover, he gets tired during wakefulness, while he is refreshed after sound sleep. It means that it is renunciation of the sense objects which provides joy or peace. When a man desires money, his mind is attached to it. But when it is acquired, the mind renounces this attachment and so he feels happy. Had the money provided him joy, he would have never felt sad, so long as he had money. But he feels sad, even after possessing that money. When a man desires anything, he becomes dependent on it. Suppose a man has a desire to buy a watch, he feels sad. Without it, this is dependence upon it. He thinks that if he acquires money, he can buy a watch, i.e., he feels independent if he has money, and dependent without money. But this is a wrong notion. If he acquires money and buys a watch, he, instead of having dependence on the watch, has dependence on money, because money is also different from the self. When a man's discrimination is hid by desire, he realizes his dependence on objects, but he does not realize his dependence on money. He thinks that he has become independent because of money. It is very difficult to renounce such a dependence, which disguises itself as independence. The world is transitory. All the worldly objects such as the body, wealth, property, etc., are decaying every moment, and are separating from us. But while enjoying these, we forget that they are temporary. We regard them as eternal and permanent. Not to talk of the common people, even a striver gets entangled in pleasures by considering these as eternal and permanent. It so happens, because his discrimination is enveloped by desire. An important fact: the Lord declares that desire is the constant enemy of the wise, so that a man may save himself from it and may attain bliss, desire being the root of all sins and sufferings. Once, a man was looking for his wife. People asked him, "What is the name of your wife?" He replied, "Disgrace." They again asked, "What is your name?" He replied, "Wicked." People said, "Don't be agitated. She is a very chaste and faithful wife. She will come to you, because disgrace ever accompanies the wicked." Similarly, suffering automatically accompany the man who hankers after perishable pleasures. A man wants to avoid suffering, but he does not renounce desire, which is the root cause of suffering. In the Rimakarodha it is declared, a man can't attain bliss, even in a dream, so long as he does not renounce desire. 791. The Lord, by the terms Anilina and Duspirana, wants to explain that desire for enjoyment of worldly objects is never satiated. The more he enjoys them, the more the desire for these is strengthened. In order to satiate it, he is inclined to sinful acts. When he has desire for wealth, he wants to earn it, by fair means or foul. Then, at the second stage, the desire engages him in theft and robberies, while in the third stage it leads him to commit violence and even murder. Thus the desire for pleasure makes life miserable, here as well as hereafter. Appendix: the main obstacle to the practice of spiritual discipline is the desire for pleasure, which is born by the contact of senses with sense objects. This obstacle lingers for a long time. Wherever a striver indulges in pleasure, there his spiritual progress is arrested. As much as even the pleasure, joy, from trance, hinders his progress, even the desire of sadhaka happiness and attachment to it arrest his spiritual progress. Est Zuka Sanjana Badnati, Gita 14:6. Therefore the Lord has declared that desire is the constant enemy of a wise, discriminating striver, not a Saramade Buddha, Gita 5:22, and Dukkam Visarvam Vivkana, Yoga Darsana 2:15. Link. Middle. In order to kill an enemy, it is necessary to know where it resides. Therefore, the Lord, in the next verse, mentions the seat of desire, the constant enemy of the wise, discerning soul. Lundra and mono-worldly pleasures are born of union with sense objects, while the joy derived from trance is born of disunion with sense objects. Worldly pleasures lead to ruin, fall, while the enjoyment of joy derived from trance rests, hinders, a striver's progress. Attachment to sattvic joy is a hindrance in the path of God realization, and attachment to rajasa tamasa pleasures leads to ruin. The senses, the mind and the intellect are said to be its abode. Veiling of wisdom by the senses, mind and intellect deludes the embodied soul. 40. Comment: desire is said to have 5 abodes: objects, Gita 3:34, 2, senses, 3, mind, 4, intellect, and 5, assumed ego, viz., doer, Gita 2:59. Though it seems to reside in 5 abodes, yet in fact, it resides in the assumed ego. As it seems to abide in these 5 places, these are called its seats. All actions are performed with the body, senses, mind and intellect. If desire resides in these, it hinders the performance of spiritual actions. Therefore, a karmagi, man of action, having abandoned attachment and the fruit of actions, performs actions only by the body, senses, mind and intellect, for the purification of the self. Gita 5:11. In fact, desire resides in the assumed ego, i.e., identification of the self with the body, etc. This ego-orness is merely assumed that I belong to a particular caste, creed or order of life. This is a mere assumption. Sins perish after bearing fruits, but desire which resides in the assumed ego gives birth to new sins. Therefore, it is desire which binds the embodied soul. In the Mahabharata, it is mentioned, in the world it is only desire which binds a man. He who is liberated from the bondage of desire becomes eligible to attain the eternal, absolute, Santi Parva 25117. It is because of desire that a man does what he ought not do, and does not do what he ought to do. Thus the embodied soul is deluded by desire. In the second chapter, the Lord declared from desire springs anger, 262, and from anger arises delusion, 263. It means that if anyone becomes an obstacle to the satisfaction of a desire, anger arises. But if the desire is satisfied, it gives birth to greed, and from greed arises delusion. Desire is an evolute of the mode of passion, while delusion is an evolute of the mode of ignorance. The mode of passion and the mode of ignorance are not far from each other. Desire deludes the embodied soul through senses, mind and intellect. The desire, which is an evolute of the mode of passion, is transformed into delusion, which is an evolute of ignorance. A man has a desire to enjoy sense objects, sensual pleasures. Fiercely, he does not get those desired sense objects. However, if he gets them, they do not stay. In spite of it, he desires to get them somehow or the other, and thinks of so many devices to obtain them. Therefore, first desire attracts the senses towards objects. Then the senses attract the mind, while the senses and the mind attract the intellect. Thus desire, veiling wisdom through the senses, mind and intellect, deludes the embodied soul and drives it to ruin. It is a rule that if a master terminates the service of a sincere servant, he is not likely to get such a sincere servant again. Similarly, if a servant does not carry out the order of a virtuous master and does not serve him, he will not get an opportunity to work under such good masters. In the same way, if a person by misusing the human body, instead of realizing God, wastes it in hankering after worldly pleasures and prosperity, he will not get this human life again. It is because of the impurity of mind that a man rejects good things and the mind is tainted by desire. Therefore, first of all, a striver should renounce desire. Among the modes of ignorance, passion and goodness, the ratio of the distance is 1:10-100. It means that modes of ignorance and passion are near each other, while the mode of goodness is far away from them. It means that desire deludes only the embodied soul, i.e., the soul which has identified itself with the body, and has accepted the relationship of mind with it. The Lord, at the beginning of his gospel, explained that the soul is different from the body. Gita 2:11-30. This is also everyone's experience. The desire covering wisdom deludes the embodied soul, the soul which accepts its affinity for the body, but not the pure soul. A man, the soul, assuming the body as I, mine and for me, attaches importance to the perishable objects and gets attached to them, which creates affinity for them. This affinity gives birth to desire. Desire, having deluded the man, embodied soul, leads him to worldly bondage. The Lord, in the next verse, tells Arjuna the device of eliminating this enemy, i.e., desire, and directs him to kill it. Therefore, best of Bharatas, Arjuna, first control the senses, then kill this sinful destroyer of wisdom and realization. 41. Senses are said to be controlled when they do not enjoy the sensory objects, but are used in order to maintain the body or to attain a spiritual goal. It means that they should neither have an aversion to disagreeable action, nor an attachment for agreeable action. Gita 18:10. Actions performed with attachment and aversion strengthen attachment and aversion, and these drive a man to ruin. Therefore, let the scriptures be the authority for determining what should be done and what should not be done. Gita 16:24. Thus, by following scriptural injunction pertaining to the performance of prescribed actions, and non-performance of forbidden actions, senses are controlled. So long as a man is swayed by his senses, he cannot have an eye on the goal of life. Without having an eye on the goal of life, i.e., without attaining it, desire cannot be totally killed. So, first the Lord urges to control the senses, in order to kill desire. First, the senses get entangled in their objects, by which desire for those objects is born. When a man performs actions with desire, he comes under the full sway of senses and has a downfall. But, he who performs his duty, by controlling the senses, without expecting any fruit, quickly attains salvation. In Jnanavijnananism, the term jnana also stands for the knowledge of the scriptures. Gita 18:42. But in this context the term stands for discrimination, what should be done and what should not be done. The term Vijnana stands for self-realization. Discrimination and self-realization both are axiomatic. All the people have not realized the self, but discrimination has been bestowed upon them. The term anishanapi, used by Arjuna, in the 36th verse of this chapter, also proves that every human being possesses this faculty of discrimination. It is by discrimination that he knows what is virtue and what is vice, sin. So, it is by discrimination that he does not want to commit a sin. But, when discrimination is veiled by desire, he commits sin without thinking of the consequences. When discrimination is aroused, he performs actions, having thought of the consequences. Thus, desire veils discrimination, as well as self-realization, i.e., it does not let these reveal themselves. So it has been called the sinful destroyer. In fact, it does not destroy them, but it hides them. This veiling has been called destroying. Here discrimination and self-realization are never destroyed, while desire is destroyed. If clouds appear before the eyes, it is said that the sun has been covered by clouds. But in fact, the sun is not covered, it is the eyes which are covered. Similarly, when it is said that desire has veiled discrimination and self-realization, it means that these are not veiled, but it is the intellect which is concealed. Padmanam hi prajayi, desire is the root of all sins. Having veiled discrimination, It makes a man blind, so he can't recognize the distinction between virtues and sins, and thus indulges in sins, which lead him to ruin. So the Lord orders to slay desire by declaring it sinful. A man wants to lead a lonely life of an ascetic, by renouncing household affairs, but he does not renounce desire. He does not even think of renouncing it. If desires are renounced, everything will be set right automatically. When a man dies with unfulfilled desires, these lead him to the next birth. It means that desires lead him to the bondage of birth and death. Thus, desires do nothing except binding him. When a man is attracted towards worldly objects, desire is born. This desire veils discrimination and he indulges in sense pleasure. The pleasure of birds and beasts is confined to the joy born of the contact of senses with objects. But a man desires objects and money and indulges in hoarding money. In order to hoard money, he adopts foul means such as falsehood, fraud, thefts and robberies, etc. Moreover, he becomes proud of himself. This pride is a demoniac trait. Thus, he is totally damned. Therefore the Lord orders Arjuna to slay sinful desire. It is said that the senses are superior to the gross body, greater, higher, more powerful, illuminator, pervasive and subtle. Than the senses is the mind, greater than the mind is the intellect, but greater than the intellect is desire. Thus, knowing that desire is beyond intellect, subduing the self by one's self, destroy this, O mighty armed Arjuna, the tough enemy in the form of desire, which is hard to conquer. 42-43 Comment. Senses are superior to body or objects of senses. It means that senses know the objects but objects do not know senses. Senses live without objects, but without senses, the existence of objects is not proved. Objects cannot illumine senses, but senses illumine objects. Senses remain the same while objects go on changing. Objects come within the range of senses, while senses do not come within the range of objects. Eyes, senses, can perceive the physical body and objects, but the body and objects cannot perceive the senses. So senses are greater, more powerful, more subtle and have a wider range of activity than objects and the physical body. Senses do not know the mind, while the mind knows all the senses. Every sense knows only its own objects, but does not know the objects of other senses. Ears can perceive only sound, but cannot perceive touch, form, taste and smell. Similarly, tongue can only taste, nose can only smell, eyes can only see, and skin can only touch. But the mind knows the five senses, and their objects. Therefore, the mind is superior, more powerful, more subtle, has a wider range of activity than senses and is their illuminator. The mind does not know the intellect, but the intellect knows the mind and senses. The intellect knows whether the mind is quiet or turbulent and whether senses function properly or not. It means that the intellect knows the mind and its thoughts, as well as the senses and their objects. Therefore, the intellect is greater, more powerful, more subtle and has a wider range of activity than the mind and is its illuminator. The master of intellect is ego. Therefore, a person says my intellect. Intellect is an instrument and ego is the doer. The instrument depends on the doer. Desire resides in the insentient portion of ego. But, it is because of the identification of the self with the insentient body etc., that desire seems to reside in the pure self, the sentient. In fact, desire resides in the ego I, because ego has the desire to enjoy pleasures and so becomes the enjoyer. The enjoyer, enjoyment and the object to be enjoyed, belong to the same class, otherwise the enjoyer cannot be attracted towards the objects. But, there is no desire in the self, which is the illuminator of the enjoyer, enjoyment and the object to be enjoyed. All the insentient objects, such as the body, the mind, the senses, the intellect and the ego are fragments of nature, prakriti. Beyond ego there is the self, a fragment of God. The self is the base, the root, the cause, the inspirer of the body, senses, mind, intellect and ego, and is subtler, greater, stronger, wider than all of them, and is also their illuminator. There is pleasure or pain in the insentient nature, prakriti, of the embodied soul, while the sentient soul does not undergo any modifications, such as pleasure or pain etc. The self, soul, is the knower of any modification. But, when it identifies itself with the insentient body etc., it has to undergo pleasure and pain. The sentient soul, by identifying itself with the insentient body etc., becomes the enjoyer. In the inert only, there is no enjoyership. The enjoyership remains in the ego, where there is identification of the soul with the body. The term asura, used in the 59th verse of the 2nd chapter, denotes the enjoyer, while the term parama denotes God, unattached universal soul. When a striver realizes parama, God or self, his taste or relish, also, turns away. Gita 259. A man has desire in order to derive pleasure or joy, while the self is, naturally, a heap of joy. Therefore, on God realization or self-realization, desire for sensual pleasure, totally perishes, forever. A vital fact: the physical, gross, body, is the object of senses. Senses are the external instruments, while mind and intellect are the internal instruments. Senses are beyond, superior, stronger, wider, subtler and illuminator, the physical body, while intellect is, body and senses. Ego, which is the doer, is beyond intellect and desire resides in the ego. The self is sentient, unaltered, uniform, and an embodiment of truth, consciousness, and bliss consolidated. But when it identifies itself with the insentient body etc., ego is born and the self becomes the doer or agent. Thus the doer, agent, has two aspects: the insentient one and the sentient one. A man, the embodied soul, because of the insentient aspect, is attracted towards the world, i.e., the worldly desires are born, while because of the sentient aspect, he is attracted towards God or the spiritual discipline. As the insentient aspect is perishable, so are the worldly desires, and as the sentient aspect is eternal, so are the spiritual desires, needs. The mundane desires are renounced, while the spiritual ones, of the renunciation of the world, of self-realization, of devotion to God, are satisfied. The mundane desires can appear, but cannot exist, while the spiritual desires can be suppressed but cannot perish, because the former are unreal while the latter are real. Therefore, a striver should neither hope for the fulfillment of the mundane desires, nor lose heart by thinking of the non-fulfillment of spiritual desires. In fact, the only desire of a man, the soul, is to realize God, whose fragment he is. But by identifying himself with the body etc., he, by an error of judgment, forgets the real desire, and hankers after worldly pleasures and prosperity. But the real never ceases to be. The desire for the real can never be destroyed. In a striver, two sorts of desire remain: one for God realization and the other for worldly pleasures. So, there is a duel between the two. It is because of the duel that when a striver practices spiritual disciplines such as adoration, meditation and good company etc., his spiritual desires are aroused. But at the identification of the self with the body etc., can be explained by an illustration. A block of iron with 4 edges has no burning power, but when by coming into contact with fire it identifies itself with fire, it develops the burning power, and fire, in spite of having no edges, becomes of 4 edges. But a magnet attracts only iron, not fire, because iron and magnet belong to the same class and the fire automatically calms down. In the same way, when there is identification of the self with the body, the sentient portion is attracted towards God, while the insentient towards the world. When the sentient portion is attracted towards God, the insentient is left because it is perishable. But when the insentient portion is attracted towards the world, the sentient one remains because it is eternal. Other times he hankers after worldly pleasures and prosperity. While having mundane desire, a striver cannot even resolve that he has to practice spiritual discipline. He cannot progress in the spiritual path, so long as spiritual desire is not aroused. When he resolves that he has only to realize God, the duel ceases and only the keen spiritual desire remains, which enables him to realize God easily. Gita 5:3. So, for a striver it is indispensable to root out this duel between mundane desire and the spiritual one. The self has an automatic attraction or inclination towards God, whose fragment it is. This attraction is known as devotion. When the self accepts its affinity for the world, that devotion is suppressed and desire springs. So long as there is desire, devotion, love, is not aroused. Without devotion, desire is not killed. The insentient fragment, hankers after sensual pleasures, while the sentient one is attracted towards God. Therefore, in fact, desire resides in the insentient fragment, but it is so because the two are identified. When the sentient self does not accept its affinity for the insentient, desire perishes. It means that as soon as the sentient self renounces its affinity for the insentient body, etc., ego, the identification of the self with the insentient perishes, and consequently, desire perishes. Desire abides in the insentient fragment of ego. The reason is that an enjoyer can be attracted towards objects of enjoyment of the world which is seen, the senses and intellect with which the world is seen, only if these belong to the same class, because attraction is possible for the objects of the same class only. As eyes are attracted to the beautiful color or form, so is the case with other senses. Intellect is attracted towards discrimination or thought, not to sound, etc. If it is attracted, it is because of its association with senses. Similarly, the self has its identity with God, and so it is attracted towards God. This identity can be realized only when the self totally renounces its affinity for the insentient matter. As soon as this identity is realized, devotion, love, is aroused, in which there is total lack of matter, the unreal. The insentient fragment, causal body, is a very subtle fragment of the cosmic intelligence, which is an evolute of nature. Desire resides in this causal body. It is because of the identification of the self with the causal body that desire seems to reside in the self. When there is no identification, a man realizes the self which is pure and uniform. In that case, desire perishes totally. Avambudhapa in the previous verses, it has been explained, the senses are greater than the body, greater than the senses is the mind, and greater than the mind is the intellect. But now in this verse, when the Lord declares that greater than intellect is desire, he means to say that desire resides in ego, not in the self. Had it resided in the self, it might have never perished. It is born when the self accepts its affinity for the insentient body, etc. In fact, it resides in the insentient fragment, matter, but appears in the self. Therefore, knowing this desire, which is beyond intellect, a striver should eliminate it. Saralstabhyatmanamatmana. The method to slay this desire is to restrain the self by the self, viz., to accept the real affinity of the self for the pure self or for God whose fragment it is. The same fact has been pointed out by the Lord in the 5th and the 6th verses of the 6th chapter, when he declares, one should raise oneself by oneself alone, and the self has been conquered by the self. The self is a fragment of God, while the body, senses, mind and intellect are fragments of the world. When the self, having a disinclination for God, has an inclination to nature, the world, desires are born. Desires are born when there is privation, and a man, the self, feels it, because of his affinity for the world, because the world is unreal, has no existence. Gita 2:16. But like a mirage, it seems to exist. As soon as the affinity for the world is renounced, desires perish, because the self has no deficiency, as the Lord declares, the real never suffers any deficiency. Gita 2:16. Even when a man has disinclination for God, and assumes his affinity for the world, his real desire, need or hunger, remains to realize God, whose fragment he, the self, is. He wants to remain alive forever, he wants to possess all knowledge, and he wants to be happy forever. This is his desire to attain God, who is the embodiment of truth, consciousness, and bliss. But it is because of his affinity for the world that by an error of judgment, he wants to satisfy this desire, need, by enjoying worldly pleasures. But this desire can never be satisfied with worldly objects, so it will have to be discarded. He who has established his affinity for the world is also capable of renouncing it. So the Lord orders Arjuna to slay this desire by dissociating himself from the world through his own efforts. This dissociation needs no practice, because practice is done with the help of the world, body, senses, mind and intellect. In fact, a man gets established in the self or realizes God by renouncing affinity for the world. A vital fact: when the self accepts its affinity for the world, it has a desire to enjoy worldly pleasures, as well as to realize God. He, the self, by an error wants to satisfy the need for God-verse realization, who is truth, consciousness and bliss, by worldly materials. Therefore, both his desires remain unfulfilled. A man can know the world by dissociating himself from it, and the Lord by identifying himself with him, because he, the self, is different from the world, while he has identity with God. But he accepts his identity or affinity for the world in order to acquire worldly things, which is never possible. Similarly, he accepts that he is different from God, which is also not a reality. Spiritual desire is necessary in order to root out worldly desires. When spiritual desires grow up, mundane desires automatically perish. When mundane desires are rooted out, spiritual desire is satisfied, viz., God, who is ever attainable, is attained. God always pervades everywhere, but a man does not realize him, because of his entanglement with worldly desires. Jalsatram Mahabaho Kamarupam Durisadam. The term Mahabaho means one possessed of long and mighty arms, i.e., a brave warrior. By addressing Arjuna as Mahabaho, the Lord means that he is brave enough to slay the enemy in the form of desire. It is hard for a man to conquer this enemy, so long as he has affinity for the world. This desire deviates even the wise from the performance of their duty, by covering their discrimination, and so they have a downfall. Therefore, the Lord has said that it is hard to conquer. So, a striver, instead of losing heart, should be aware of this enemy. Desires appear and disappear, whether these are fully. When all the desires of a striver are rooted out, the mortal man becomes immortal, and he very well realizes the eternal. Kathipanasad 2:314, Brihadaranyaka 4:417. 0 Lotus side. When a man renounces all his desires, he attains God's realization. Srimad Bhagavata 7:10-9. Satisfied or partly satisfied, or not satisfied at all, while the self ever remains uniform, and notes their appearance and disappearance. So he can easily renounce his affinity for them, which is merely assumed. Therefore, a striver should not be afraid of desire. If he is determined to attain his aim, he can slay desire very easily. Everyone is independent, qualified, deserving and able to realize God, but it is not so with desire, because these can never be satiated. The Lord has bestowed upon beings this human body, so that they may attain him. So they can easily renounce desires, but it is because of their attachment to the worldly persons and objects etc., that it seems difficult to renounce desires. The Lord creates unfavorable circumstances, so that man may be warned not to have desire for favorable circumstances, otherwise these will lead him to suffering. It is a rule that he who has a desire for worldly persons and objects cannot escape pain. The Lord declares, the pleasures that are born of contacts with objects are only sources of pain. Gita 5:22. The soul possesses infinite strength. It is because of the power derived from the soul that intellect, mind, and senses seem powerful. But it forgets its strength because of its affinity for the insentient, and regards itself as subordinate to the intellect, mind and senses etc. Therefore, it is necessary to know the self, and recognize its power, in order to kill the enemy in the form of desire. A man's only aim is to attain the imperishable Lord, not the perishable world. He has a desire to acquire the perishable objects. Aim remains the same constantly while desire change. Aim is realized while desires may or may not be satisfied, but they disappear. A man wants to realize his aim, God, even though his body may be broken into pieces. Desire is born out of affinity of the self for the insentient matter, and it resides in it, but seems to reside in the self. If one does not accept affinity for the insentient, desire has no existence. Therefore, when the Lord urges Arjuna to slay desire, he means to say that desire has no existence of its own. A desire appears and it automatically disappears. So, if one has no new desires, the old ones automatically disappear. A man becomes aware of something wanting through himself only when he regards the worldly objects, such as the body etc., as I, mine and for me, but he wants to make up for the lack by worldly materials. So, he has desire to acquire these. But it is impossible to make up that lack by those materials because he, the self, is imperishable, while these are perishable. Thus, he by desiring transitory objects, gains nothing, but suffering. Therefore, by calling desire an enemy, the Lord urges Arjuna to slay it. This desire can be easily eliminated through the discipline of action, because a striver following the discipline of action, performs every major or minor act, for the good of others, rather than to satiate his own desire. All his actions are performed, for the welfare of others without any selfish motive. All his resources, are not his own, but have been acquired and are likely to be lost. So, he uses them, for the welfare of the world, by regarding these as the world's, without any selfish motive. Thus, he gets rid of desires easily, and consequently, attains his aim of God realization. Then, nothing further remains to be done, to be known, and to be acquired for him. Appendix: here the Lord has mentioned senses, mind and intellect, but he has not mentioned ego. Ego is greater than intellect. In the 4th verse of the 7th chapter also the Lord has mentioned ego after intellect. Therefore here also the term sao should be interpreted as desire which abides in ego. Unless and until the self is realized, desire abides in ego. After self-realization, desire does not persist in ego. Paramdhamvanyavartate, Gita 259. Bliss abides in the self, but a man by according reality and importance to non-self wants to derive pleasure from it. As long as there is affinity for the non-self, desire persists, but when affinity for the non-self, inert matter, is renounced, then prema, real love, ensues. The desire is in the self. Apyasya, Gita 259. Being in the self, it is an obstacle to self-realization. If it is not in the self but is in senses, mind, intellect, how is it an obstacle to self-realization by us? It is because of its abode in the self that the self feels happy and sad and becomes a doer and an enjoyer. In fact, the desire does not abide in the self, but it is merely an assumption, and therefore it can be wiped out. Middle. Therefore desire is seated in the middle. Self only through assumption. A man assumes a thing, which abides in ego, to be abiding in the self. Ego is identified with the self and desire abides in that ego. Therefore so long as ego persists, attraction, viz., desire, which belongs to the same class to which ego belongs, persists, and when ego perishes, then attraction, viz., true love belonging to the class of the self, ensues. In desire there is attraction for the world, while in true love there is attraction for God. All the three worlds and endless universes are sense objects. Sense objects are in one region of senses, senses are in one region of the mind is in one region of the intellect is in one region of the ego, and the ego is in one region of the self. Therefore the self is very huge, within which there are all the three worlds and endless universes. But a man, the self, by assuming his affinity for ego, a fragment of lower, insentient, nature, feels himself very small, unipresent. Thus with the words Om, Tat, Sat, the names to the Lord, in the Upanishad of the Bhagavad Gita, the knowledge of Brahma the Supreme, the scripture of Yoga, the dialogue between Srinath Qa and Arjuna, ends the 3rd discourse, designated Karmaga, or the discipline of action. This chapter is designated Karmaga, the discipline of action, because the discipline of action has not been described so clearly in any other chapter, as in this. Words, letters and avaka, said, in the 3rd chapter. 1. In this chapter in Athatrada Iyadya there are 3 words, in Arjuna avaka etc., there are 8 words, in verses there are 542 words, and there are 13 concluding words. Thus the total number of words is 566. 2. In this chapter in Athatrada Iyadya, there are 7 letters, in Arjuna avaka etc., there are 26 letters, in verses there are 1,376 letters, and there are 45 concluding letters. Thus, the total number of words is 1,454. In each of the verses of this chapter there are 32 letters. 3. In this chapter there are 4 avaka, said, Arjuna avaka twice and Sri Bhagavan avaka twice. Meters used in the 3rd chapter. In this chapter, Ragana being used, in the 1st quarter of 1st and 37th verses, and in the 3rd quarter of 11th verse, there is Ravtpula Nagana being used. In the 1st quarter of 5th verse there is Navapula Bhagana being used, in the 1st quarter of 19th, 26th and 35th, and in the 3rd quarter of 8th and 21st verses, there is Bhavapula Nagana and Ragana being respectively. In the 1st and 3rd quarter of the 7th verse there is Sanklarna Vipula meter. The remaining 33 verses, have the characteristics of Pathyavectra and Usdupmeter. Sri Hari 4th chapter Introduction. The Lord, in the 39th verse of the 2nd chapter, said to Arjuna, "This is the wisdom of Sankhya given to thee, to attain equanimity." 0 Arjuna. Now listen about equanimity to be acquired, through the discipline of action, in which a person by performing action for the welfare of others, without any selfish motive, attains equanimity. Thus, according to the context, in response to Arjuna's question, Lord Krishna, having described the marks of a man of steady wisdom, completes this topic. At the beginning of the 3rd chapter, Arjuna asked Lord Krishna, "If you think that knowledge is superior to action, why do you urge me to do this savage deed, war?" In response to his question, the Lord, from the 4th to the 29th verses, lays emphasis on the performance of actions, by which a man attains equanimity. In the 30th verse, he says that surrendering all actions to him, with a discriminative insight, free from desire and egoism, he should perform actions without mental agitation. In the 31st and 32nd verses, he declares the sweet fruit of following his preaching, explained in the previous verse, and the harm in not following it. In the 35th verse, he declares, "Better is death in one's own duty." In the 36th verse, Arjuna asks, "By what is a man impelled to commit sin?" The Lord replies, "It is desire, all-devouring and most sinful, which is the enemy," and ordered Arjuna to slay this enemy. Though the Lord's teaching continues from the 37th verse, yet in the 43rd verse, when the answer to Arjuna's question is over, sage Vedavyasa concludes the 3rd chapter, and begins the 4th chapter. It shows that the Lord, having answered Arjuna's question, takes a pause and then starts again. The discipline of action, which was being described in the 47th and 48th verses of the 2nd chapter, by the term imam, this, in the 1st verse of the 4th chapter. Therefore, the 4th chapter is regarded as an appendix to the 3rd chapter. There are 2 important factors pertaining to the discipline of action: performance of actions, and 2. Special knowledge about action. Arjuna wants to renounce the performance of action, so he says to Lord Krishna, "Why do you ask me to be engaged in this savage deed?" Therefore, the Lord lays special emphasis on the performance of duty, especially in the 3rd chapter, while in the 4th chapter, he imparts knowledge about actions. He declares, "I shall teach thee such action, the nature of action and inaction, after knowing which, thou shalt be liberated from evil, the wheel of birth and death." 4:16. This karmaga, in spite of being without beginning, was lost to the world through a long lapse of time, because of the absence of scholarly teachers, sages, who could impart it. The Lord, in the first 3 verses, describing how karmaga was handed down from ancient times, proves how it existed from times immemorial. The blessed Lord said, "I taught this imperishable yoga to Vivasvan, the sun god, who expounded it to Manu, and Manu proclaimed it to Ikshvaku." 1 comment: the kings, such as Surya, Manu, and Ikshvaku, who have been mentioned by the Lord, were householders, and they attained perfection through the discipline of action, leading a householder's life. Therefore, here the words imam, avyam yogam, this imperishable yoga, stand for karmaga, the discipline of action. Though karmaga has been described in the Puranas, historical records, and Upanishads, philosophical parts of the Vedas, also, yet it is not as thoroughly detailed, as in the Gita. The Lord is eternal, his fragment, the soul, is also eternal, and so is the affinity of soul for the Lord. Therefore, all the disciplines of action, knowledge and devotion, are also eternal. Here, the term avyam shows that karmaga is eternal. The affinity of the soul for God is eternal. Just as a chaste wife does not have to make effort to be dear to her husband, in the like manner, a striver does not have to put in any effort, in order to belong to God. But, when he accepts his affinity for perishable actions, objects and incidents etc., he does not realize his eternal affinity for God. Therefore, a karmagi, in order to renounce his assumed affinity for the world, utilizes his body, senses, mind and intellect etc., for rendering service to the world, by regarding them as the world's. He thinks that just as the smallest particle of dust is a fragment of the huge earth, so is the body a fragment of the vast universe. By accepting this belief, karmas, actions, will be performed for the world, but yoga, Nityaga or eternal union, will be for himself, i.e., he will realize his eternal union with God. By the terms Vivasvate Praktavan, the Lord wants to explain to the strivers that as the sun in the solar system while performing its action by providing heat and light, remains, Lord Krishna declares in the 8th chapter of the AM that the bright and the dark paths of the world are verily thought to be eternal. AM 8:26. Unengrossed. Similarly, all the strivers should perform actions without attachment according to available circumstances. Gita 3:19. They should also impart this teaching of karmaga to others for the public welfare by remaining unengrossed, without desire for fruit, without a sense of mind and without attachment. The Sun God was king at the beginning of creation. Lord Krishna taught this imperishable yoga to the Sun God. It means that Lord Krishna was the first preceptor in the beginning, and so has karmaga come from times immemorial. It seems that the Lord tells Arjuna, whatever teaching about karmaga I am imparting to you is not new but eternal. Question: why did the Lord teach this yoga to the Sun God at the beginning of creation? Answer: the Lord taught it to him because he knew that he was a deserving candidate. 2. Such teaching is imparted to the firstborn, as Brahma, the creator, who created man and imparted teaching to them. Gita 3:10, in order to inspire them to perform their duty. In the universe also, the Sun God was the firstborn, and then the entire universe was born of him. The Lord taught this yoga, first of all to the Sun God. He meant to get it imparted, through the Sun God to all his progeny, by way of transmission by succession. 3. The Sun is the eye of entire creation. He imparts knowledge to all the people, and when he rises, they wake up and are engaged in their work. He sets an example to them for the performance of their duty. He has been called the soul of the entire world. Therefore, teaching imparted to the Sun God in the scriptures, the Sun God has been called Savita, which means the creator. The Western scholars also regard the Sun as the creator. In the Mahabharata has been said addressing the Sun God, 0 Sun God, you are the eye of the entire world and the soul of all beings. You are the birthplace and the inspirer of the good conduct of the followers of the path of action. You are the abode which should be attained by the Sankhyajas. You will also be communicated to all beings. Therefore, Lord Krishna first of all taught this imperishable yoga to the Sun God. In fact, this teaching imparted by Lord Krishna, the manager of the world theater, to the Sun God, is a drama staged by him, for the welfare of the world. As Lord Krishna taught Arjuna, the incarnation of Nara, the wise sage, for the welfare of the world, so did he teach this yoga to the Sun God, the embodiment of knowledge, for the welfare of the entire world. This yoga has done a lot of good to the world, is doing and will continue to do, in future also. Karnaga is the main course of action for householders. Out of celibacy, household life, the retired and the renounced, orders the 4 stages, orders, of life. Household life is most important, because it is a householder that provides for the other stages of life. A householder, by performing his duty, can easily realize God. He need not change the order of life. Lord Krishna, in mentioning the names of the kings, such as the Sun God, Manu and Lakshvaku, wants to say, that at the beginning of creation, they as householders, having slain desires, realized God. Lord Krishna and Arjuna were also householders. Therefore, Lord Krishna through Arjuna, teaches all householders that they can realize God, as householders, without leading a secluded life as ascetics by performing their duty. In spite of being a householder, Arjuna thinks that it is better to live in this world even by begging than to perform a savage deed of slaying honored teachers in war. Gita 2:5, viz., he thinks that the renounced order of life is superior to the household life. Therefore, the Lord says to him that he is the base of karmajas. You are the free gateway to salvation and you are the refuge for the salvation seekers. You hold the entire world. This world is illumined by you. You sanctify it and it is preserved by you without any selfish motive. Vanaparva 3:36-38. Noble householder of the royal family. So performance of actions will lead him to salvation, in the same way, as renunciation leads an ascetic to salvation. Kanaga consists in the utilization of available circumstances. So Kanaga, the discipline of action, can be followed by people of every caste, creed, country and order of life. The Lord has mentioned the names of noble and influential kings of the past, so that people may draw inspiration from them, in order to perform their duty. An important fact: attachment, affinity, for actions and objects, is a stumbling block to Kanaga. When a householder renounces pleasure, his zest also comes to an end. When a person starts enjoying pleasure, such as eating a sweet dish, he relishes it very much. But, as he goes on eating it, the taste diminishes and finally, it ceases. But, he commits an error, as he does not make the distaste permanent, by attaching importance to it. He regards this distaste as satisfaction, reward. But the fact is, that is the state of deficiency in which he has no power of having pleasure. The interest or desire which diminishes or perishes, cannot be the characteristic of the self, and therefore, it, the self, has no real affinity for the objects etc., which he desires or wants. Our real affinity is, for God, and therefore, devotion while following a spiritual path for God realization, is ever enhanced. Even when he realizes God, his devotion increases continuously, and it is transformed into love, devotion. The self is also real, so no one has a desire in the least for one's own negation. When actions, instruments, body, senses and mind etc., objects and materials, are perishable, how can these bear imperishable fruit? How can pleasure and satisfaction be derived from the fruit of perishable things to match the pleasure and satisfaction achieved on God realization? Therefore, a striver has to renounce his affinity for actions, instruments, such as body, senses and mind etc., and objects. He can renounce this affinity only when he does nothing for himself, wants nothing for himself and regards nothing as his own. But he utilizes everything, by regarding it as of the world and rendering service to the world. A karmagi performs actions scrupulously and lovingly, without desire, attachment and feeling of mind. Desire, attachment and a sense of mind pollute actions, while careful and loving nature purifies these. When actions are performed with desire, attachment and a sense of mind, objects are destroyed, and man has a downfall. The thought of actions come to the mind, time and again, i.e., affinity for those actions continues. But when actions are performed scrupulously, devotedly and lovingly, there is proper use of objects, and man is elevated and the thought of actions do not come to mind, i.e., affinity for these is renounced. As soon as this affinity for actions is totally renounced, a striver realizes the self or God, who is ever present and existent. Everyone can easily assume that whatever he possesses is not his own, but is acquired, just as he has acquired the body from parents, education and knowledge from preceptors and so on. It means that every man, even the richest one, has to depend on others, in one way or the other. So, it is his duty to render service to others, with all his possessions, because he has acquired them from others. This is known as karmaga. No one is dependent and unable to follow it and for its practice. In fact, duty is that which can be performed easily, which must be performed, and by performing which a man certainly attains his aim. A man is not responsible for the performance of action, which he cannot perform. And, what is forbidden, must not be done. When a person does not perform forbidden actions, he either does nothing or he performs only prescribed actions. Duty is always performed, for the welfare of others, without expecting any reward. Actions, with the expectation of reward, should not be performed, because these lead to bondage. But, it does not mean that actions are performed, without any aim. An act without any aim, cannot be performed by anyone, except by an insane person. There is a vast difference, between fruit, reward, and aim. Reward is perishable while aim is eternal. A man's aim is to attain God who is ever attainable, and for which this human life has been bestowed upon him. He cannot realize God, without performing his duty, in a disinterested manner. He cannot perform his duty, so long as he indulges, in reward for actions, heedlessness and indolence etc. In fact, performance of duty needs no effort, it is performed automatically. When a man performs action for himself with egoism, attachment, desire and a sense of mind, it involves effort. Therefore, the Lord declares, action which involves strain, effort, is said to be of the nature of passion. Gita 18:24. As the Lord is ever engaged in the welfare of all beings, so is his power. As a news broadcast by a particular radio station is received on the same frequency by radio sets, similarly, when the karmagi performs all his actions for the welfare of the world without any selfish motive, his power is identified with the all-pervading, benevolent power of God, and his actions become uncommon. Thus, because of Lord's power, his actions are conducive to the welfare of the world. Therefore, there is neither any obstacle in the way of performing his duty nor does it involve any strain. A man can perform his duty without depending on any person or circumstance. According to Karmaga, the discipline of action, giving help to others according to their need, is service. When the engine of a car goes out of order and the driver is trying to push it forward, if someone helped him, it is service. But he who looks for service does not render real service, but he performs actions only because by doing so, his aim is mundane rather than spiritual. Service is rendered according to available circumstances. Therefore, a karmagi neither changes circumstances nor does he seek these but utilizes these. The utilization of the available circumstances is karmaga. This yoga handed down thus, in regular succession, came to the royal sages. But through long lapse of time, it was lost to the world. Zero oppressor of the foes, Arjuna. To comment, the kings, such as the sun god, Manu and Ikshvaku, learned the karmaga, followed it and also inspired their subjects to follow it. Thus, it was handed down in regular succession to the families of the royal sages. This karmaga is a special layer of the kings, the warrior class. Therefore, every member of the warrior class should know it. Similarly, the heads and leaders of a family, society, village and town etc., must also know it. In ancient days, the kings who knew karmaga administered the affairs of state smoothly, without being attached to royal pleasures. They had a natural inclination for the welfare of the subjects. The great Sanskrit poet Kalidasa writes about the kings of Solar dynasty. Those kings levied a tax on their subjects in the same way as the sun sucks water from the earth, in order to supply it to the earth in the form of rain, 1,000 times more. It means that the tax realized from the subjects by kings was all used for public welfare. In order to provide for their household expenses, they followed occupations, like farming. By practicing karmaga, they were automatically endowed with singular knowledge and devotion. Therefore, even great sages went to those kings, in order to learn wisdom. Sri Vedavyasa's son named Sukadeva went to King Janaka, in order to gain wisdom from him. In the 5th chapter of the Chandogya it is mentioned that 6 sages together went to King Asvapati, in order to learn knowledge of Brahma, the Supreme. Having mentioned kings, such as Janaka and others in the 20th verse of the 3rd chapter, and the sun god, Manu and Ikshvaku etc., here, as Karmajas, Lord Krishna wants to urge Arjuna that he should also perform actions accordingly, follow karmaga as the ancestors did, in former times, as he was also a householder and a member of the warrior class, Gita 4:15. Moreover, it was very easy for him to learn it, because he belonged to the warrior class. God is eternal and the means karmaga, jnanaga and bhaktiyoga, disciplines of action, knowledge and devotion, etc., are also eternal, as they have been laid down by God. Therefore, they never cease to be. The Lord declares, the real, never ceases to be, Gita 2:16. The yogas are eternal, even if these are not practiced. Therefore, here the term nasta means passing out of sight, rather than out of existence. In the 1st verse of this chapter, this yoga has been called imperishable. Therefore, if this term nasta is taken as out of existence, there will be a contradiction between the two statements. Moreover, the Lord again in the 3rd verse declares that he is going to reveal the same ancient yoga to Arjuna. It means that the religious texts and the learned sages who possessed knowledge of this yoga, and practiced it, had more or less disappeared from the earth. King Asvapati declares, in my kingdom there is neither a thief, nor a miser, nor a drunkard, nor one who does not offer oblation to the consecrated fire, nor an ignorant person nor an adulterer. Then how can there be a prostitute? Chandogya 5:11-5. The Lord declares that it was through a long lapse of time that it disappeared, because at the beginning of creation, the Lord taught it to the sun god, Then it was handed down in regular succession and the royal sages come to know it. But due to the absence of great spiritual souls, possessed of the knowledge of this yoga, it could not be handed down. So, at present only a few people know and talk about it. Though this doctrine was not practiced, yet it did not cease to be, because without selflessness, which is the essence of karmaga, even other disciplines, such as of knowledge and devotion, cannot be constantly practiced. Ajvayanagi through discrimination, by regarding actions as unreal, renounces his affinity for these, while a bhaktiyogi renounces affinity for them by surrendering these to God. No affinity, howsoever, is to be maintained. This is the doctrine of karmaga. Therefore, Ajvayanagi and a bhaktiyogi will have to adopt the principles of karmaga, even though they may not practice it. It means that at present, though it has been lost, yet as a doctrine it exists. The fact is, that in karmaga, karma, actions, have not disappeared, but yoga, selflessness, has disappeared, because a man performs actions with a selfish motive. It means that strivers have a firm belief that they will attain God through actions in the same way as they acquire worldly things through actions. But they forget the reality, that God is ever attained. Actions are performed for the world, while yoga, union with God, is ever for one's own self. Yoga is not attained through actions, as is self-evident. Therefore, the generality of the assumption that yoga is attained by performing one's duty for the welfare of the world without any selfish motive. Action is performed in order to attain the state of actionlessness. Action is said to be the means to attain to yoga. Gita 6:3. When actions are performed with a selfish motive, the impetus for actions is enhanced. But when they are performed for the welfare of others, the impetus for actions perishes. It means that nothing remains to be done by doing for others, while actions are continuously performed when one does for himself. When nothing remains to be done, the striver realizes his union, which is self-evident, with God. This yoga can be attained through action, has practically caused the disappearance of yoga. This human body has been bestowed upon us, so that we may practice karmaga, i.e., serve others without any selfish motive. But we are so much absorbed in hankering after pleasures, prosperity and honor etc., that we do not pay heed to it. Thus, this knowledge has been lost, because we have forgotten it. A man by rendering service can control not only birds, beasts and persons, but also the gods, manis, sages, saints and even God. But having forgotten this practice, he has been overpowered by pleasures, which lead to hell and 84 lakh forms of lives. This is called concealment of karmaga. It is the same ancient yoga that has been declared to thee today by me, for thou art my devotee and my friend, and this yoga is the supreme secret. 3. Comment back. Tasimesakaseti Arjuna regarded Lord Krishna as his companion, comrade, Gita 11:41-42, but now he has become his pupil, Gita 217, i.e., earlier he was a comrade devotee, while now, he has become a disciple devotee. An order can be given or a sermon can be preached, only to a disciple rather than to a friend. The Lord preached his sermon, only when Arjuna surrendered to him, i.e., took refuge in him. The secret, which is not disclosed even to a comrade, is revealed to a disciple, who surrenders himself to his preceptor. Arjuna also says to Lord Krishna, I am thy disciple, teach me, who have taken refuge in thee. Therefore, the Lord reveals his secret to him. It was because of Arjuna's reverence for Lord Krishna, that he, instead of opting for a well-equipped army, chose unarmed Lord Krishna alone, as his chariot driver. Common people regard the objects bestowed upon them by God as theirs, while in fact they are not theirs, but they do not regard the Lord, who is actually theirs, as theirs. They, instead of having an eye on the glorious Lord, look at his glory. Having attached importance to the glory, their intellect becomes so dull, that they do not even believe in his existence, i.e., they do not even look towards him. Some people adore him, in order to gain riches and glory etc. Though riches lie at the feet of devotees, yet true devotees do not adore him for riches, but they adore him to attain him. Those who hanker after riches are devotees, slaves to riches, while those who want to attain God are his real devotees. Arjuna, having abandoned riches or glory, well-armed Narayani army, chose Lord Krishna. Consequently, it was only he, to whom the gospel of the Gita was preached on the battlefield. though there were other great souls such as Bhisma, Drona, Yudhisthira etc. nearby. Finally Arjuna was able to regain the kingdom also. Savamaya Tedya Yogi Praktapuratina. By these terms, the Lord does not mean to say that he has given a full description of this yoga, but it means that whatever has been declared by him is complete in itself. Further, having answered Arjuna's question concerning his manifestation, incarnation, the Lord again starts the topic of Kanaga. Having heard the words of Lord Krishna, Arjuna, the son of Kunti, chose unarmed Lord Krishna as his helper while he could have chosen the well-armed Niraiya army consisting of 1,09,350 foot soldiers, 65,610 horses, 21,870 chariots and 21,870 elephants. Mahabharata, Adhyaga 721. The Lord declares that the same Kanaga, which was taught to the sun god at the beginning of the creation, has been taught to Arjuna. He declares that through long lapse of time, this yoga was lost to the world and he also was not manifest. Now he has manifested himself and has also revealed this yoga again. Therefore, Karmaga, which has liberated people from bondage of actions from time immemorial, will also liberate them today. As the Lord teaches his supreme secret to Arjuna, in the 66th verse of the 18th chapter, by declaring, "Take refuge in me alone, I shall then liberate thee from all sins." Here also, he discloses his supreme secret by declaring, "I taught this imperishable yoga to the sun god at the beginning of creation and I am preaching the same to you today." The Lord seems to say to Arjuna that though he, while playing the role of his chariot driver, is obeying him, yet he is preaching to him the same yoga, which was taught to the sun god at the beginning of creation. He is disclosing this secret to him, because he is his devotee and also a loving friend. Not to talk of a common man, even a striver, pays attention to the preaching, but he does not pay attention to the preacher. Having listened to this sermon on yoga and having studied it, a striver thinks over it, and he does not take the preacher as the omnipresent Lord Krishna himself. So, the Lord, by using the term rahasyam, secret, introduces himself and urges the striver to behold him, ever. When the Lord declares that he preached the gospel of yoga to the sun god and is preaching the same to him, he also means to say that he is the preacher or the preceptor of the entire humanity. As an actor, while playing his role, does not disclose his identity to the audience, but reveals it to his bosom friend, the Lord also discloses to his devout devotee his identity. This is his supreme secret. Karmaga can also be regarded as a supreme secret. The supreme secret is that actions which bind a man, the soul, may also liberate him from bondage. If actions are performed with a selfish motive, by regarding the objects as one's own, these lead him to bondage. But, if these are performed without any selfish motive for the welfare of others, they lead him to liberation, salvation. This karmaga can be practiced independent of all the circumstances, favorable or unfavorable, riches or poverty, health or sickness, etc. While practicing karmaga, there are three important factors which need attention. 1. The self is real, imperishable, while all the objects which are acquired are unreal, perishable. So, how can the perishable be possessed by the imperishable? So nothing is mine. 2. I need nothing for myself, because the self lacks nothing. Moreover, how can the perishable objects be useful for the imperishable self? 3. Nothing is to be done for the self. The first reason is that the self is a fragment of God, who is sentient, while actions are insentient. The self is eternal, while actions and their fruits are transitory. Therefore, when anyone performs actions for the self, he, the self, is attached to those actions and their fruits. Actions and their fruits disappear, but attachment for these continues, which is the cause of his birth and death. The Lord declares, attachment of the soul to the modes of nature is the cause of its births, in good and evil wombs. Gita 13:21. The second reason is that the responsibility for actions is his, who can perform these, i.e., who possesses the resources to perform these, and who wants to acquire something or the other. The self, being actionless, uniform, unchanging and perfect, can do nothing without accepting its affinity for the body. Therefore, the self has nothing to do for itself. The third reason is that the self is real and perfect. It lacks nothing. The Lord declares, the real, never suffers any deficiency. Gita 2:16. When it lacks nothing, there is no question for it to have any desire, in order to acquire anything. Therefore, it has to do nothing for itself. In Kanaga, karmas, actions, are performed for the world, while yoga, union with God, is for the self. When actions are performed for one's own self, one cannot realize one's union with God. When the full flow of actions is towards the world, we realize God, because the body, senses, mind, intellect, objects, riches and property etc., whatever we possess, is not different from the world and is of the world. So, these are to be used for rendering service to the world. Therefore, actions are to be performed for others, in order to renounce affinity for the world, in the form of objects and actions. This is known as karmaga. By this karmaga, the attachment for action, the desire to acquire and to live, and the fear of death, perish. As, for actions performed, in the sunlight, the sun remains detached. Similarly, all action performed in the light of the self also remains detached, because the self is sentient and unchanging, while actions are insentient and changing. But when by an error, it accepts its affinity even in the least, for objects and actions, i.e., regards them as its, and for it then those actions bind it. As the sun performs its duty always very punctually and scrupulously, so does a karmagi perform his duty efficiently and promptly. If karmaga is rightly followed, a karmagi, having the influence of dhyana, knowledge, attains knowledge, while with a disposition of devotion, attains devotion. Automatically, by following karmaga, a striver does supreme good to the entire world, whether other people perceive it or not, realize it or not. He works as a fountain of inspiration for others, and thus renders service to them. A vital fact the Lord, while beginning the Gospel of the Gita, has described, from the 11th verse to the 30th verse of the 2nd chapter, that every being experiences or realizes, I am. Even trees and mountains feel this, though these cannot express it. This can be clearly seen among beasts and birds, because they fight with each other, as they notice their own existence. Otherwise why should they fight? I am distinct from the body and the world. This is a common experience of every human being. It is called discrimination. As far as a man is concerned, he has been specially endowed with discrimination by God. The pity is, that he does not respect it and use it appropriately. Senses, mind and intellect, are the fragments of nature, prakriti, and so whatever is known, through these, is knowledge born of nature. The knowledge of scriptures that is acquired through the senses, mind and intellect, is also born of nature. The knowledge of God, is far superior to this knowledge. Therefore, he can be known only by the knowledge of the self. When a man attaches importance to the knowledge of the self, i.e., discrimination, wisdom, he develops the power to know who I am, what is mine, what is sentient and what is insentient, what is God and what is nature, prakrti, and so on. The same discrimination is applied for kanaga also. This is something vital. In karmaga, two important factors predominate. There is no doubt about one's own existence, I am. 2. Whatever objects we possess are not ours, because these are acquired. These were neither ours in the past, nor will remain ours in future. I, the self, remains the same, while these objects, body, senses, mind, intellect etc., are changeable and perishable. As actions appear and disappear, so does their fruit. So actions and objects have their affinity for the world, not for the self. When this discrimination, wisdom, is aroused, desire perishes. When desire perishes, self-evident actionlessness is revealed, i.e., karmaga is accomplished. Discrimination, wisdom, is enveloped by desire. Gita 3:38-39. A man cannot discriminate between the right and the wrong, because he hankers after worldly prosperity and pleasures, in having a selfish motive. Thus, he cannot decide what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. He wants to find out a solution to the riddles of life through the body, senses, mind and intellect, or by changing the circumstances. But circumstances cannot be changed by him. So he gets more and more entangled, and cannot decide his duty. But, when his discrimination, wisdom, is aroused, he gets rid of the desire for pleasure, prosperity and selfishness, and then he clearly sees his duty, and then all entanglements perish. Actions bear fruit in the form of outward circumstances, such as riches and poverty, praise and blame, honor and dishonor, fame and defame, profit and loss, birth and death and health and sickness, etc. He who becomes either happy in favorable circumstances or sad in unfavorable circumstances, by accepting his affinity for them, is a fool. Why? The reason is that he cannot change the circumstances, but he can rise above these, i.e., can remain detached from them, by making proper use of them. In favorable circumstances he should render service to others, while under unfavorable conditions, he should neither feel sad nor should he desire favorable circumstance. Such a striver easily gets liberated from worldly bondage. Undesirable circumstances are fruits of sinful actions. So, sinful actions which hurt others should not be performed, even in a dream. But in unfavorable circumstances, which are the fruits of sinful actions of the past, worry, sadness and fear, etc., automatically come to his mind, even though he does not commit new sins. A striver should not be attached to these. He should believe that these come to his mind in the same way as a cow whom he has sold visits his house, because of old habit. As the cow stops coming to his house and starts living in the new place. Similarly, when a striver does not get attached to these feelings, these stop coming to his mind. Even when discrimination, wisdom, is not fully aroused, a karmagi has a determinate intellect, and he has to renounce affinity for the perishable, which is not his, and he has to render service to the world without enjoying worldly pleasures. It is because of his determinate intellect that he ceases attaching importance to worldly pleasures. Then, he cannot be entangled in the mirage of pleasures. Thus his determinate intellect leads him to salvation. Good company and the study of the scriptures strengthen this intellect. Therefore, every striver should have a firm intellect, that he has to attain salvation. Everyone is independent in having this determination, without seeking the least help from anyone else. The Lord declared that he had taught the imperishable yoga to the sun god, etc., and he was teaching the same yoga to him, Arjuna. Having heard his words, Arjuna had the curiosity to know how Lord Krishna, who was sitting before him, had taught this yoga to the sun god, at the beginning of creation. In order to get this point cleared, Arjuna puts a question in the next verse. Arjuna said, "You are of recent origin, while the birth of Vivasvan dates back to remote past. How then am I to understand that thou did declare it to him in the beginning?" For comment, Arjuna asks Lord Krishna that he was born in the house of Vasudeva a few years ago, while Vivasvan, the sun god, was born earlier at the beginning of creation. So how could he believe that he had taught this yoga to the sun god? This question of Arjuna expresses his curiosity, rather than argument or blame. He wants to hear from Lord Krishna the secret of his divine descent, because only he was capable of revealing this secret to him. Arjuna asks Lord Krishna how he should understand that he had taught this yoga at the beginning of creation, because he was born later while the sun god had been born earlier at the beginning of creation. As the Lord had recounted about several generations of the sun god, it proves that he had imparted this knowledge much earlier. In response to Arjuna's question, the Lord reveals his omniscience to manifest his divine descent. The blessed Lord said, "Many births of mine have passed as well as of thine. Arjuna, I know them all, but thou knowest not. Scorcher of foes." Comment in the third verse, the Lord said to Arjuna, "You are my devotee and my friend." So Arjuna put to him a question, quite frankly and without any hesitation. Arjuna was curious to know the secret of his divine descent. So the Lord reveals the secret. When a devotee has curiosity to know some secret, the saints also reveal it to him. Saint Tulasi also declares in the Ramakirotamanas of sages do not conceal a secret. When they come across a deserving hand, 1,111,011. Bhafmi mi Vyadatandi Janman Lavakarjuna. Lord Krishna says to Arjuna that both of them have passed many births. But his manifestation, which will be described in the 6th verse, is different from his birth, which will be described in the 19th verse of the 8th chapter and the 21st and the 26th verses of the 13th chapter. In the 12th verse of the 2nd chapter, the Lord declared, "Never was there a time when I was not, or when you or these kings were not, nor will there ever be a time hereafter, when we all shall cease to be." It means that God and his fraction, soul, both are without beginning and eternal. There are some yogis, ascetics, who by practicing spiritual discipline possess an intuitional knowledge, and come to know of their previous births. Such yogis are called Jnana yogis. On the other hand, there are the saints remain concealed and don't reveal themselves. But they reveal themselves in the following three cases. When a devout devotee having great relevance for those saints, has curiosity to know them. 2. When a devout devotee's body is cast off. 3. When the saint goes to cast off his body. In the second and the third cases the saints reveal themselves even to those devotees who have not so much of reverence for them, but they respect them from their heart and want to know them. Other yogis, who naturally know everything of the past births of all beings, without practicing any spiritual discipline. The Lord is such a yukta who knows of the beings of the past, the present and the future. Gita 7:26. Knowledge of God knows no bounds of past, present and future, and it is constantly present. The Lord, in spite of pervading everywhere, everything, every person, and every circumstances etc., transcends them all. The Lord's statement, "I know them all," should thrill strivers with delight, because the Lord knows them and has an eye on them, whatever they are. A man does not possess intuitional knowledge to know of previous births as he is attached to perishable objects and persons etc. Similar was the case with Arjuna. He did not want to fight, because his kith and kin would be killed. He declared, in the 33rd verse of the first chapter, "Those for whose sake we desire kingdom, enjoyments and pleasures, stand here in battle, renouncing their lives and riches." It shows that Arjuna desired kingdom, enjoyment and pleasure, and so he did not know about his previous births. Accumulation of materials, such as riches etc., for enjoyment and pleasure, is called parigraha. When a person totally renounces this tendency for accumulation, he develops an intuition, which enables him to know of previous births. Pataphajalagadarsana 239. The world, actions and objects are changing and unreal, so it naturally suffers deficiency, while the self has no such shortage at all. But when he assumes his affinity for the world, he feels shortcoming in him and wants to make these up by having desires. In order to satisfy those desires, he remains absorbed in different activities day and night, but desires are never to be satiated. Due to desires man acts as if he is unconscious, not to speak of the knowledge of several births. He does not even know his duty, of the present, i.e., what he should do and what he is doing. Link. The Lord, in the preceding verse, explained that he and Arjuna had passed through many births. Now, in the next verse, he explains the secret of his descent, incarnation. Though I am unborn, of imperishable nature, the Lord of all beings, yet, subordinating my nature, Prakriti, I manifest myself, through my Yogamaya, divine potency. 6. Comment. This is the 6th verse, and in this verse, there is a description of 6 things. God is birthless, imperishable, and the Lord of all being. These 3 things pertain to God, Prakriti, nature, and Lord Krishna has described in the Gita that some people know him as birthless, imperishable, and the Lord of all beings, while others don't know. The description is as follows. 1a. He who knows him as birthless. He who knows me as unborn and beginningless, the great Lord of the worlds, he among mortals, is undiluted and freed from all sins. 10.3. b. Those who don't know him as birthless. This deluded world does not know me, the unborn and imperishable. 7.25. 2a. Those who know him as imperishable. The great souls worship me with a single mind, knowing me as the imperishable source of beings. 9.13. b. Those who don't know him as imperishable. The foolish don't know my higher, imperishable and supreme nature. 7.24. 3a. Those who know him as the Lord of all beings. He who knows me as the enjoyer of sacrifices and austerities, the great Lord of all the worlds, and the friend of all beings, attains peace. 5.29. b. Those who don't know him, the Lord, the deluded, don't know my higher nature as the great Lord of all beings. 9111.